Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
I was 22 and living on my own for the first time when this happened. I had just gotten off work around 11 in the afternoon. To reach my apartment building, I could either walk on the sidewalk or cut across this communal garden. I saved about 1 whole minute of walking time by cutting through the communal garden, but being young and stupid, a lot of times I took the shortcut. That night, I got that weird feeling to not take the shortcut. I kept to the sidewalk, but there's no one else around. When I got past the garden, all of a sudden, this large man pops up from its exit path. There was no way he could have been in front of me or just behind me as I was walking. I would have noticed him. The only logical explanation was he had been hiding in the pitch black garden. A drunk who had been sleeping it off. No, my body was screaming at me to get out of there. I began walking faster. My dad had taught me to always carry my keys in my fist with the key pointed out in case I needed to punch someone, so I had that, but I'm 5'4" and probably weighed 110 pounds. This guy was tall and big. My only chance was to outpace him. I'm speed walking at this point and I feel him matching my pace, getting closer. He's breathing heavily. I feel this angry energy coming off of him, but my apartment building is right there, so I put on a burst at speed. When I reach the entrance, 2 people are leaving and hold the door for me. And him, I don't know why I didn't tell them I thought this guy was following me. My mind froze and I was just trying to get inside my apartment. Plus, I was still trying to rationalize it. Maybe he was visiting someone in the building. Maybe it was all just a coincidence. Don't be paranoid. Besides, it took only a couple seconds for them to be out the door. I had missed my chance. I'm climbing the stairs as fast as I can. It's a 3-story building and I live on the 3rd floor. He's climbing the stairs too, still right behind me. I get to my floor, which has 4 apartments on the right side and 4 on the left. I pass by apartments 1 and 2. He's still right behind me. I stop at apartment 3 and he stops in front of apartment 4 where I know he doesn't live. He hasn't said anything, just breathing hard, and I think there's no way I'm going to open my apartment door and have him push me inside and assault me or worse. He also hasn't knocked on the door of apartment 4. Worth noting is that the apartments are U-shaped, with mine and my neighbor's door being very close together. So I banged my own apartment door as loud as I could but yell my neighbor's name. Hey Kevin, let me in. This startles the guy, even more so when my own apartment door doesn't open but Kevin's does. Kevin sees the guy standing right in front of his door and asks what he wants. The guy starts mumbling something about the wrong apartment, but I have my own door open so fast that I am inside my place in a flash, locking the door behind me. I grab my cordless phone to call the police, but I hear Kevin through the door telling this guy he needs to leave. The guy does. Kevin knocks on my door, asks if I'm okay. I thank him, say that I am, but inside I am still frozen, adrenaline pumping, scared. I thank him again and tell him to have a good night, lock my door again. I have my phone in my hand, ready to call the police, but I start trying to rationalize it again. What exactly happened? The guy followed me home but then said he had the wrong apartment. Are the cops going to care about something minor like that? I try to calm myself down, but I'm also berating myself. Why didn't I run the instant I felt him following me? Why didn't I tell the people we passed when the front door opened that I thought I was being chased? Worse, why didn't I tell Kevin that the second he opened his door and saved me? He could have let me inside his apartment and we could have called the cops together. But because of my stupidity, everything felt so ambiguous and I was questioning myself. A couple of weeks later, I'm visiting my grandparents and my grandfather is reading the paper. He tells me that a woman was assaulted in the apartment building across the street from mine. It's the same guy. He had multiple convictions for assault and had recently been released on parole. For context, I am a 20-year-old female and at the time of these events I was around 12 and 13, so I grew up in a very rural area. Like my town was so small it was legally considered a village. My house was one of 4 on a span of 40 acres. My childhood home, my grandparents' house right up the street, and 2 neighbors. One of the neighbors, we will call him T, had been living across near my family for as long as I can remember and he rented out a trailer he owned which was inhabited by the 4th neighbor, we will call him Jay. Jay and his girlfriend, who we will call, had moved in a few months before these events and I hadn't really met them. I knew of them but hadn't interacted with them directly the day I met Jay and it was extremely awkward as I was a kid and didn't really want to talk to them. But my grandma had made me go with her to drop off some vegetables she had grown in her garden. When they came out after my grandma knocked on the trailer door, I was first struck by how they looked. I know that sounds bad, but I'm not judging. My grandma started the conversation and I tried to be polite as I was raised to be by introducing myself when told to do so. I wasn't really able to finish my sentence as I noticed Jay was staring at me very intently me. He looked like he was either mad or hungry, or both. Not the creepiest off the bat, as they both seemed polite enough, and I brushed off the stare as just him trying to be polite, looking at me as I spoke to him as most people do. The creepy part is that as time went on, he began to try and be near me more and more. He'd ride his bike past our house over and over for what seemed like hours while me and my brother played catch in the yard. Then he began to go to church with me, my brother, and my grandparents. He'd make sure to sit right next to me in the back seat of the car as he rode with us. If my brother tried to sit in the middle so I wasn't right next to Jay, he'd throw a fit about how my brother was squishing him against the door. Then he began coming to my grandma's house when she'd have me and my brother after school, offering to tutor me with various subjects. What really scared me was that I had begun to see him walking near our house at night, trying to shine a flashlight into my window. He tried various things to get close to me, tried to convince my parents to let him teach me how to golf, tried to help me practice my catchy positions for softball, tried to get me to go with him and into the movies. And none of these things ever included my brother, Olivier. Things finally came to a head when I was playing with my dog outside in our front yard, and he started repeatedly doing laps on his bike down the road again, staring at me like he did the day we met. I was extremely uncomfortable. I've always had very good intuition about people, and something was always just off with him. But that day I was terrified. He parked his bike right in the middle of the road and got off. He started walking towards me at almost a jog, and I just kept backing away. What happened next is why I believe that dogs are a better judge of character than people could ever hope to be. My boxer ran up to him and launched herself onto him when he was about 6 feet from me. She tore into his arm and I saw blood. I screamed and my mom ran out shortly after. She was trying to pull my dog off of him, but as soon as she was able to, holding onto the dog's collar, she started yelling at him, asking him why he was in our yard with me alone. He couldn't answer her and just started running back to his bike, riding back to the trailer. My grandma ended up driving him to the hospital as Jay, and it didn't have a car, and I learned later he got 16 stitches. He never gave a reason as to why he was approaching me, and they moved out shortly after. I haven't seen him since and still terrified to this day to run into him again. I want to tell this story to warn others. I, an 18-year-old female, live in Maryland, USA. I work at a very popular burger restaurant. I work at the pavement window, which is where I stand all night. I'm very friendly. I know sometimes a smile and a compliment can make someone's day a little better. Just this same night, before the creeper came, I had a customer tell me I was so happy and she loved me for it. That gave me the courage and energy to survive this next interaction. I'm used to the awkward comments and stares from old men. I'm sure it's my friendliness that attracts them. Our uniforms are not revealing. They think I'm naive. Maybe I am. A lot more than I thought. I'm fully aware of the dangers of trafficking. This particular old man came through just before 6. He pretended to not hear his order, then laughed like it was a joke between two friends. This is not uncommon. It's an old man thing. No red flags yet. I tell him his total and he hands me all but the change. When he does this, he waves the money around, making me chase it. I was able to snatch the cash, but again, it was just an old man thing. Not concerned yet. He stared at the company name on my shirt and asked if that was my name. I don't wear a name tag for this reason. I joked that I was going to change my name permanently to that. He perked up. At this point, I should state that he was white, mid-60s to 70s, driving a small, white SUV with a kayak on top. He had some scruff on his face and was holding a phone to his ear this entire time. When I finally began to engage with him, he moved the phone to be facing me. Looking back, I believe he was recording me. At no point did he speak into the phone or acknowledge it in any way. He probed with more pressing questions. Here's the thing, I have the same last name as someone from US history. Most old people like talking about that stuff, so I told him my last name and he didn't reflect or laugh. He just accepted and continued asking questions. That's when I started to get this sinking feeling. He still owed me change. I told him. He grabbed another dollar and handed it to me, but he wouldn't let go. He wanted to know my first name, and I dodged answering because I was getting creeped out. He wouldn't let go of the money and was practically drooling for more data about me. I gave him a name I don't use and he smiled, finally letting go. I got his change and told him to have a nice day. I then immediately left the window and told one of my coworkers about the weird experience. He returned just 2 hours later. I didn't recognize his car on the cameras until he got to my window. I hadn't thought too much about our interaction and was busy texting my dad about whether or not a chicken sandwich was a burger. My stomach dropped when I saw his face. I have many regulars, all of whom I'd have been happy to see. I hope he doesn't become one. I'll call the police. He smiled and said, "Hey." The woman one with the last name. I half smiled back and wished for the days when we all wore masks. I tell him his total and he makes me chase the money again. For the entire time, he had his phone against his ear, facing me. He starts asking even more intimate questions about me. I lie or dodge them best I can, giving him 0 correct answers, wanting our interaction to be as short as possible. Some of the questions he asked me: how often do you work? What time do you leave? How old are you? For that one, I knew he wouldn't leave without a number, and I had a nasty feeling the younger wouldn't be the better. So I said, probably 20s. He joked about me being legal. I made a face and tried to get his change even faster. He asked if I had a boyfriend. I was getting more and more nervous, so my answers started getting more sarcastic. I told him boys are trouble. He specifically talked about himself and said he'd treat me right. I handed him his receipt and told him to have a great night. He threw his hands in the air and was saying, "Don't be like that, I'll treat you right." I shut my window and said bye. He made a bit more of a fuss, but eventually drove forward. From his question about when I got off work, I believed he was watching the restaurant. I was shaky by this time and called my mom. She immediately drove up. I talked to my manager and I was a little unsure of the car's color, so he checked the camera for me. Shout out to my manager, he's the best. I continued at my window, watching for the old guy, but I didn't see him again. I left an hour early and gave my manager specific instructions to not place a girl at my window. These interactions are unfortunately what caused formerly happy and cheerful service workers to become sour and quiet. I think I'll be taking a couple days off. I had already had another job lined up, and I'm excited to start it. I'm currently traveling sea with my 2 brothers. We just arrived in Saigon this morning. In the evening after dinner and a few beers, me and my 2 brothers decided to sit on a bench in Hao Dan Park and have a quick smoke. We were chatting away sat on the bench when I noticed a Vietnamese man repeatedly looking at us and walking in circles very near where we were sitting. At first I wasn't too concerned about him, however my spider senses were alerted. Then a minute or 2 later I noticed another Vietnamese man dressed as a Grab delivery driver acting suspicious and repeatedly looking at me and my brothers. The stalkers were both on the phone and I believe they were communicating with each other. Being in a foreign country, this alerted us heavily and we decided to leave. However, it was a good 600-meter walk to the park exit. As we were walking, I noticed both Vietnamese men had got on mopeds and were following us through the park, stopping behind trees and watching us. They then overtook us and sat at a bench further down the path waiting for us to cross their path. Being aware of this, we left the path and started walking on muddy grass as the crow flies to the nearest exit, avoiding the 2 men who were still watching us and clearly had bad intentions. We are 100 meters from the exit when my younger brother looks behind us to see one of the men sprinting towards us. My younger brother took stance, standing his ground, and asked the man what he wanted. The man's posture became very small and he began talking very quietly. Both me and my younger brother kept a good distance and told him to leave us alone as we walked backwards towards the exit, noticing the second assailant was also approaching us wearing motorcycle gear. However, my oldest brother decided instead of trying to get out of the situation, he got closer to the whispery Vietnamese man to hear what he was saying. Both me and my younger brother were yelling at him to get out of here, but he was being an idiot. It took the Vietnamese guy 5 seconds to win my oldest brother's trust. Then out of nowhere, when my older brother was leaning in very close trying to hear the whispery man, the guy grabbed my brother's crotch. He was shocked. I was ready to fight, expecting to be robbed or something, but the crotch grab was super unexpected and a real curveball. After the crotch grab, we started shouting and approached the men in an aggressive manner in a fighting stance. This slowed down their approach enough for us to make a dash for the park exit. The whole situation was unexpected and we didn't engage in any violence towards the men, just shouting at them. We walked out the exit into the busy city and walked around for a while, making sure we were not being followed before heading back to the hotel. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. I was a sophomore in high school when this happened. It was during May and I stayed after school with half of my grade due to an award show. It was conducted by the literature department and our principal. Lee and my group actually won the best message award for our short film. Anyways, after the award show was over, me and my friends went back to our classroom to change into more comfortable clothes and to spend some more time together while we waited for our parents to come pick us up. Only 5 of us were in that classroom. As time went by, 3 of my friends left with their parents. It was only me and my best friend in the classroom. 30 minutes later, her dad called her to say they were waiting for her on the school's yard. By the way, our classroom is on the 3rd and highest floor. Together, we walked down the stairs to the ground floor. She asked me if I wanted to come outside with her and maybe wait in the waiting area next to the security. To this day, I curse myself for not saying yes. Instead, I said no and decided to wait in the waiting area inside our building. I could have went to my principal's office office and wait with her since she liked spending time with me and talking to me. If you couldn't tell, I was a nerd and one of the top people in my grade. Anyways, in my school there were 5 couches in the waiting area for both students and parents. As I was walking to the waiting area, I saw a janitor but didn't think much of it. I put my bags down, but as I was about to sit down, I had a weird feeling like he was watching me and my moves. I felt too uneasy to sit down, so I stayed standing up while holding my bags in case I had to run or throw them to save myself. As a reflex, I raised my head and looked at him. He continued to look at me. It was as if we were in a race where neither of us were looking away. Believe me when I say I wanted to look away but couldn't. Maybe it was because I saw him as a threat, or maybe it was because I was too scared and uncomfortable to move. He had this weird smirk on his face, but since it was getting dark, I couldn't exactly tell. I don't know how long we looked at each other, but I broke out of my trance when I saw my classmate from the previous year walking outside the building. In a desperate attempt, I waved at her and she saw it. Then I remember her coming in and walking towards me saying, "I saw someone waving," to which I replied with, "Oh, it was me. I thought you left and was surprised to see you, so I waved at you. Actually, if you don't mind, can you walk me to the waiting area next to the security?" As we were walking outside, I looked back and saw the janitor still staring at me. I was wearing high heels, a short skirt, and a tight shirt, but it was an award show and we wanted to dress up. I don't think that these sort of stuff happen to women because of what they wear, but I do think he was staring at me because of my attire. At the waiting area next to the security, I was so anxious while waiting for my mom, thinking, what if he comes in here? Even when my mom came in, when I got in the car, I was shaking slightly and wasn't in the headspace to speak about anything. So I told my mom that we got an award, but that I was too tired to speak. Also, to anyone wondering, I only told this story to 2 females I used to work with outside of school. I never had the courage to tell my parents or anyone in my school. However, after this incident, I tried to not be alone at school and always have someone with me in case something like this were to happen again. One of the reasons I never told anyone was the fact that nothing physically abusive happened and I probably couldn't prove anything. This was a hard dose of reality for me since I realized that females weren't safe anywhere, not even in their high schools. Writing this makes me feel better in a way that I can finally let it out of my system. It was about 10 in the afternoon and I was staying at a hotel in downtown Chicago right by Lower Wecker Drive. I had just gotten an Uber Eats delivery because they weren't doing room service because of COVID. Potbellies important later. I was listening to music, but I had my hood up because it was freezing. I was smoking and this guy walked up to me and asked for a few cigarettes. I gave him one and my lighter to use. Come on, you could give me more than that. I thought if I just gave him another cigarette he'd leave, so I gave him another one. I expected him to say thank you, give me my lighter back, and leave. He didn't do any of those things. He was standing right in front of me and I started to get anxious. I moved back and I'm essentially against the window for the area where you check in. He just kept standing there and then he noticed my bag of food. "Can I have some of your food?" I told him I was sorry, that it was just a sandwich and soup because my husband ordered food from a different restaurant. "Well, at least give me half the sandwich then." I apologized again and said no. Then he started getting closer to me. I realized I needed to get away, but he blocked me. "Dude, give my lighter back." I thought I needed to pretend I wasn't freaking out. I put out my cigarette and put it back in the pack. "I don't have any food and I could freeze to death. I'm sorry, you don't have food." I don't know what else to say. I didn't want to say, "Hey, you're wearing a really nice looking coat and fancy sneakers, so give me some of your food." That he was right up in my face and I was scared because he seemed to be getting more angry. "I'm sorry, I can't, please move." "Yes, you can." At this point, I was terrified he was going to hit me or something, so I banged on the window and the people at the check-in desk ignored me. He got really angry and started yelling incoherently. Then, like a miracle, my mom called and I answered. I started crying hysterically and I started saying, "Mom, thank God, oh my God, this guy won't leave me alone." My mom told me to do anything to get away. At that moment, the guy stepped back and looked around. There was no one around, but I took advantage of him being distracted and pushed past him and ran inside. I was crying so hard I could barely get words out. I was so scared and I realized because I tried to get help and nothing happened. If my mom hadn't called, I don't know what would have happened. Later, I thought even if I gave him the soup, it would be like when I gave him a cigarette and it wasn't enough. I did go back down for a cigarette later, but I stayed by the revolving door. This woman was also smoking and I told her what happened. She showed me her mace and said all women should have it. To give some context, I've been homeless with my mom and her emotional support animal for the last few months. When we first became homeless, it was my first year of college. Where I live, college is free for the first 2 years, and my college, after I gave them an explanation, gave me and my mom a hotel room for a few weeks. The hotel room was fine, nothing special, but was probably better than most considering it was like $170 per night. About 2 days into our stay, we went downstairs to do laundry, but the washers in the hotel was too much expensive for us. So I texted her and was waiting by it for her to pull the car up so we could go to a laundromat instead. While I was waiting, I was on my phone, so I didn't notice my mom pull up, and she yelled to me to hurry up and get in the car. While I grabbed the dog and my clothes, I noticed she was talking to the man 2 doors down from our room. Our room was on the 2nd floor, so I thought it was weird that she started a conversation from the car to someone upstairs, so when I got in the car I asked her about it. She proceeded to tell me after she yelled at me to hurry up, he had responded to her that he'd be down in a minute. So she was explaining to him that she was talking to me. We both thought it was weird that he responded like that to her, but I brushed it off that maybe he was waiting for someone from Uber or something. That was until we got back to see his door slightly open and him staring out of it with just his face. I tried to brush it off again because I thought that maybe he was still waiting for an Uber or Lyft or something, because he had everything in his room turned off and it was still quite cold out being in the beginning of spring. I would see this man staring out of his room with all of his lights off periodically about half the time I left or was coming back to the room. My mom, who is a heavy smoker, would get scared by the man staring at her and would come back inside the room early, so throughout our stay we tried our best to avoid the man if we could. If he opened his door, we went back inside. If we went outside or got back from somewhere and he was staring, we'd avoid eye contact. A little later that night I went out to the car for something and saw a couple sitting on the stairs talking about something, but I didn't think much of it. Later that night, it was probably about 3 in the morning, I was gaming with my friends and my mom was up watching TV. We're both night owls, when all of a sudden our dog started barking at the door. We thought this was weird since she had never just barked randomly at the door, only really barking when she wanted food we were eating or when she wanted to play. I grabbed her and put her in my lap, petted her while I played to calm her down. Her barking at the door became something she did often during our stay there, and it was almost exclusively at night within the hours of 2 a.m. to 7 a.m. We didn't figure out what her barking was about till the end of our stay in the hotel. Our last day there, we saw that couple moving out of their room. Turned out they were next to us, and my mom got to talking with them while I was putting our stuff in the car. It turned out the couple was moving rooms because the man from 2 doors down was harassing the couple, knocking on their door and singing to the woman through the door late at night. Our dog was more than likely barking at the man whenever he approached our room, as one night we were awoken by what sounded like a knock before our dog started barking. But by the time I checked the door, there was no one there. He was probably trying to do a similar thing he did to that couple with us, and with him staring out the door, he was more than likely mentally unwell. And while I hope he gets the help he needs, I also hope he didn't do something potentially harmful to anyone else who ended up in the rooms next to him. I tend to go running and walk my dog anywhere between midnight and 5 in the morning. I vary it for safety. Also, my puppy is a new addition to my nightly routine as I've only had him for a year. I know as a young woman in her 20s it's not smart, but I've been doing it for quite some time. It's where I go to clear my head and feel safe, though it is ironically very unsafe, I suppose. I just moved to a new area, and though it should be safer than the inner city, I've been having enough odd things happen to make me scratch my head. Tonight, around 4:45 and 5 in the morning, as I'm walking my dog in the neighborhoods across the intersection, a silver Toyota is very slowly driving up behind me. Before it passes, it pulls back and reverses. I assume it's someone parking or pulling into their driveway. At this point, I'd already crossed the street to avoid another oddly idling car, so even as I tried to rationalize it, I was on high alert. To backtrack, originally, I'd been walking on the left side and crossed to the right because the first car had pulled up, then been idling there for quite some time as my dog, and I slowly made our way up the street towards it. I always play it safe this early late, so I crossed just in case it was a weird person. As the Toyota reverses, a man steps out of the first car, which is now diagonally from me, looks at me, looks at my dog, locks his car, and heads across the street away from me. This was a T intersection for reference. I'm not sure if this other car is of relevance. However, as I'm paying attention to this, I still note the second car that had reversed into a spot in the street, and had it moved, it would have gotten it or gotten out. I stay vigilant as there's usually not too much activity in the suburbs around this time unless it's the weekend and people are partying late. 2 cars on the same street. Same behavior was incredibly odd. I breathed a sigh of relief as first guy, who had looked at me several times at this point as he crossed the street and right before he got in, finally left into the apartment complex gate. Sometimes I wonder if I look suspicious too being out so late. I finally make it to the top of the T and go right, and there's only 1 block until a main road, then from there I can cross to my apartment. There's usually a few cars here and there at this time. I make it to the well-lit main street and relax. The second I let my guard down as if on quit, the silver Toyota pulls past and reverses reverses towards me. Note that before I had it pass just idled behind me, and now he was reversing in front of me. My gut clenches and I knew it was one of those moments. I go decisions. I hesitate. He's about 5 to 10 yards ahead. I considered walking past normally and running if things got weird, but decided to trust my gut and cross the street. Just as I check traffic to see if I can cross, he steps out. I consider running again. I see Noah coming, not a car in sight. It's a tanned, bald man holding a cigarette. It was particularly strange because rarely have I had people step out of their vehicle to try and do something to me. In my experience, if you ignore whoever is trying to lure you into their car and don't get close, they just drive off. It's why I avoid vehicles in general to not give a chance of contact. He circled all the way around the car to the sidewalk, looks at me, then just says, "Oh, I thought you needed a ride," as if he realized something. It was the way he said it, just like that, not a question. As I'm answering, he's already leaving the curb. "No sir." Then he just went back to his driver's side, hops in and drives off. It was just strange. He said it like a statement and basically barely waited for my response. I wonder what he was planning to do and why he had second thoughts. I'll never stop my nighttime adventures, but one day I might not have any more luck left. My name is Slade. I'm 25, born and raised in Arizona. This literally just happened to me, so I decided to bring it here to all of you wonderful people this evening. I'm a huge stoner and don't drive. I decided to take a bus a few miles down to the dispensary. This was at about 8:30 in the afternoon. Wanted to get a new Indica card. Purple Punch, it's my favorite by far. Doubt it. Walked back towards the bus stop to go back home. As I walked closer to the bus bench, I noticed a guy sitting there. Didn't think much of it. I'm antisocial, so I always go into any social setting ready to be absolutely silent. However, I didn't get a chance this time, because as I'm sitting down he starts asking me something ... but I had my headphones on and couldn't quite hear what he said, so I took my headphones off and asked what was that. Then he responds, "Did you want to get your hair cut?" Well, staring at me ... with very wide eyes ... not blinking ... if I were a Betty man, I'd say he was on something. I definitely wasn't expecting that question, and I just awkwardly say, "Oh, I'm alright." I then noticed he was wearing an Arizona Cardinals uniform, and I just so happened to be an Arizona Cardinals fan. So since my entire socializing ability revolves around sports, I decided to ask, "Are you an Arizona Cardinals fan?" He then looks at me funny for a split second. "No, I just got this a few months ago," he says. I then ask, "So how long have you been cutting hair?" Without blinking, he answered, "Just picked it up a few months ago." "Who taught you how to cut hair?" I asked, even more sketched out at this point. His eyes shifted and then he says, "I learned on my own ... Come on man, let me touch you up in the back." Mind you, he was consistently pushing to cut my hair throughout this conversation. I'd even told him like I don't have any cash on me right now, indicating that like I couldn't even pay for this service even if I wanted it ... but he just answers with, "That's no problem. I got my clippers in my bag now. Come on." So I decided to just be real with the guy. "Listen, I'm real sorry. I just don't feel very comfortable getting haircuts from people I don't know ... and like at night and stuff. You feel me?" This dude never changed facial expressions this entire interaction. He finally goes, "True that." Continues to glare into my soul. I decided in that moment it was time to get out of there. Luckily this bus stop was right in front of our local gas station, so I just walked in there for a few minutes just to kill time because unfortunately that bus wasn't showing up for another 17 minutes. I didn't want to stay long because I didn't want the employees to think I was stealing or something, so I waited only about 6 to 7 minutes, and literally as I'm walking out, there I see the haircut guy walking in, still staring at me. Luckily I walked past him and I just noped out of there to another bus stop down the street. Bus finally got there. I saw the dude at the back of the bus, but he didn't bother me anymore, and I made sure to keep my eyes the complete opposite of his direction the entire time. This happened almost 15 years ago when I was 7. My best friend's mom would babysit my brother and I before and after school. My mom would usually drop us off at our house around 6 a.m. in the morning. She would make us breakfast, and the three of us would walk to our elementary that was less than 10 minutes away. For preface, we would walk through an adjacent neighborhood, through this small wooded area that had an enclosed bridge, and that led us to the back of our elementary. The elementary sits back in a long tree line that runs about half a mile north and another mile south. Anyways, we're about to get to the turn where we walk into the tree line to the bridge, and this guy comes cruising down the street. At first, I don't even think we noticed him considering how young we were, but right when he's about 10 feet away from us, he slows down to virtually 0 miles per hour. There was nothing that stood out about his appearance either. He was middle-aged, white male, very generic. Well, we all stare at the car and start walking super slowly. If we stop, he would stop. If we walk, he would slowly go. During this whole ordeal, he has a blank expression on his face. Not anger, no smirk, just this sinister deadness almost. This went on for probably 5 minutes because we were too scared he'd jump out of the car if we turned our backs on him, and I was mainly scared for my little brother. Finally, he speeds off and we run the rest of the way to school. Immediately go to the principal's office, and at this point we are bawling. We gave them our version of the story, his description, and whatever else a 7-year-old is actually capable of giving. They take action by calling the cops and our parents. The cops come and we explain where it happened in the story again. Then our parents ended up taking us out of school. From then on, we weren't allowed to walk to school anymore and our babysitter would take us. The reason this ended up being so creepy is because apparently there had been reports around that time of a guy who would sit under the bridge we walked over right by the school and watch people. They didn't know if he was homeless or if it was this other guy who we encountered. They never caught the guy and we never saw him again. One night my mom asked me to throw out the trash. I live in a tiny residential complex meaning 6 to 7 small buildings together bounded by a common walls and fencing. It also has 2 small parks in it, so my area is pretty safe. Not a lot of people enter here because it's a bit secluded. That night not a lot of people were present and I was going towards the garbage can, which was right outside the complex. It was dark when I first noticed this guy. We made eye contact and I could tell he was struggling a little to find the address. I just ignored him and threw the trash into the can. While returning, he was still there in the darkest corner, and again I eyed him suspiciously. I really like to help people with addresses, so he called me towards him and said he lost his job in COVID and now has to do this but is not very good at directions. I still was standing at a safe distance because I found this guy suspicious. I asked him where he wanted to go and he answered a location opposite to where I live. I asked to use Google, but then he took out his phone and said, "This is my company phone, I don't know how to use it, please tell me how to." I just told him to type the address, and well, he already knew how to use the Google Maps because the address was already typed in, but still kept asking me how to. I didn't realize that, but he was trying to get me closer to his bike. I was cautious, so I took the phone from his hand and started the maps and handed it to him. He was still asking obvious questions, but I already started walking away. Then he started saying thanks in a very sweet voice that gave me the chills. He was complimenting me how sweet of a girl I am. I waited before going to my building in case he was following me. You might think the interaction I had with him wasn't that creepy, but here's the deal. After a few days I heard a similar story of the delivery guy asking for the same address from my friend, but the creepy part was he gave her the phone and started jacking it in front of her. He even threw a used tissue on her feet while wiping his kids with the tissue in front of her and then trying to touch her. I then heard the same story from another friend, but her story was even worse. She met the same person as well in our local area doing all of the same stuff and jacking it in front of her. He somehow got her number and found her house. He called her and told her that he knew where she lives and how he likes her and all. Turns out a lot of girls of my age group saw and helped this guy and saw him pulling out his thing in front of them and jacking it. I was the only lucky person to not witness it. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. When I was little, I lived in an apartment complex that consisted of 2 buildings with a slight gap in between them. It was only about 50 feet, so I'd often walk by myself to go visit my mom's best friend in the other building. The apartments were surrounded by thick woods that had blackberry brambles so thick you couldn't stick your hand in without getting torn up by thorns. One afternoon, I went to my mother's best friend's apartment to deliver Girl Scout cookies and stayed later than I meant to because I was fascinated by her aquariums. It had started to get dark by the time I was leaving, but I wasn't scared because the buildings were so close. I had taken about 10 steps when my inner voice started screaming. I'm older now, so I recognized what it was, but at the time it was like being overwhelmed with a feeling in my gut. I looked into the woods across the parking lot and saw the intense red glow from someone taking a drag on a cigarette. I turned back towards my apartment, trying to pretend I hadn't seen anything, but then I heard the sound of something large moving in the woods. I turned my head for just a moment and there was a gaunt, scary looking man starting to run at me. I took off, screaming bloody murder, knowing I was less than 50 feet away from the safety of my apartment. I could hear his feet slopping the pavement behind me and he was gaining on me. I was nearly on my porch steps when my uncle, who lived next door, opened his door to see why I was screaming bloody murder. I collapsed into his arms screaming about the man chasing me from the woods, but by the time Mike opened his door, the man was gone. At first they didn't believe me because there'd been nobody there, but I was so hysterical they decided to check it out. They noticed an area that had been disturbed in the blackberry brambles, but they were so thick, Mike had to use his machete to cut through them. About 2 feet into the area of the disturbance, there was a small clearing with a pile of cigarette butts where the man had been standing, watching and waiting for me. The man chasing me had disappeared, so they think he ran between the buildings when I started to get close to my apartment door. So about a week after this incident, my mother's boyfriend and I were riding dirt bikes through the woods by our apartment. There was a retainer pond that we liked to fish at, so we were headed out that day to see if we could catch anything. We discovered a campsite on the trail that hadn't been there a few weeks prior, and Russ decided to check it out. It was just a tent, cooler, boiler, a fire pit, and trash strewn everywhere. The trash part really bugged Russ because we believe in the leave it better than you found it principle, and I could tell he was pissed. As we approached the tent, he announced himself to see if anyone was there, and when they didn't respond, he pulled back the zipper of the tent. After looking inside for a moment, he ordered me to back up, but the damage had already been done since I had gotten a clear look at what was in the tent. Attached to the walls and littering the floor was some of the most brutal and sadistic adult magazine content anyone could imagine. And the worst part of it was the graffiti that had been added after the fact. Most of the models had their eyes scratched out, lines across their throat like they'd been cut, and there was blood drawn dripping out of their orifices. It's been over 30 years since this happened, and the image is still splashed bright upon my memory. There was a torn sleeping pad, and the pad looked like it had a substantial stain that could have been blood. Russ stood there in silence for a minute, then told me to get on my bike because we were going home. When we got home, he called the sheriff, then led them out to the torture tent in the woods. They destroyed the campsite, and it was never spoken of again. I never put two and two together as a child, but as I got older, when I thought about it, I realized how unbelievably lucky I am. So this happened about 7 months ago. I was visiting San Diego for job interviews and staying at my favorite hotel in Sorrento Mesa. For a background, I'm a 40-year-old man and a pretty big guy. I'm 6'1" and a former club bouncer. Now, onto the weirdness. On my third night, I was up pretty late after hanging out with some old friends after my interviews. I got back to the hotel around 2 in the morning with some Sonny's donuts. After eating a few, drinking a few more, and watching South Park, I decided to have a smoke before going to bed. This made it now around 3 in the morning, so I go downstairs, walk out front to the smoking area by the fountain, but there's another couple who are also staying at the hotel already there. I didn't want to impose, so I decided to just walk around the outside parts of the hotel while I smoked. I walked around the pool, the barbecue area, the basketball courts, then started back for the side door. As I did, a black sedan drove up alongside me and stopped. The window rolled down, and a tiny Asian woman asked if I knew how to get out of the parking lot and back to the street. Now, from where we were when she asked me, this was literally in a straight line about 150 feet in front of her, so I thought she was drunk or just blind. So I just politely said yes, just keep going straight, and turned left at the tree. She then asked me if I could get in the car and show her. Now, again, I'm a former club bouncer. There was absolutely no intimidation factor, but for some reason, I instantly felt uneasy. Again, it was literally right in front of her. She could see the road. Also, the windows were all tinted far more than they should have been, and I honestly couldn't tell if anyone else was in the car. I used the smoking as an excuse to not get in the car, but she said she didn't mind and gave me a very creepy smile. I politely declined and again pointed out that the road was literally right there, so I'd just be walking back in 5 seconds anyway. She again asked if I would get in and show her. This was feeling like a weird kid / ice cream truck situation. I mean guys, how often do decently good looking women just drive up and ask you to get in their car at 3 in the morning in a hotel parking lot? Nothing about it was right. Again, I politely declined as I finished my smoke and was luckily already standing right at the hotel side door when all this started, so I just went in. The woman just drove off as she rolled up the window right exactly to the exit she just asked me to show her to. So I told the front desk about it and they said they'd keep an eye out, but I'm quite sure nothing was ever done or came of it. Just one of those things that really makes me wonder, why did she want me in the car so badly for? It had to be some kind of scam. I just wonder exactly how much danger I was in. I live in Sacramento, California, where every summer we have the state fair. I was in my late teens and my friend and I decided to check out the fair together. Parking was $10 and we were cheap and decided to park across the street. Well, a few streets deep in from across the street because a lot of people had the same idea. The fair was typical fair stuff and we had fun. It was almost 10 in the afternoon and we decided to get out of there. The fair was lit up with lights and chaos, but the further we got away from it and the deeper we got into the back streets across the street from the fair, the darker it got and the less people you saw. My friend faced me and said maybe I should get my mace out just in case, and we both laughed because both of our families at different points had given us mace to stay safe, but because we were young and dumb we thought we were invincible. My friend drove, so she was digging in her purse looking for her keys and slowed down while doing so, and I was a few feet ahead of her. At that moment the fair fireworks started popping off in the sky and I turned around to look for several seconds. It was walking backward while doing so. I turned around and at the moment as I was passing a creepy gray van, a man popped out behind it and grabbed me forcefully forcefully with both arms around me and started picking me up. Immediately my friend ran up and sprayed mace in his face. She was able to do so because the mace happened to be attached to her keychain, which she just got out of her purse. She accidentally got some mace in my eyes and it hurt, but even though my eyes were burning, I vividly remember opening them up enough to see that there was this cloud of mace floating in front of the guy's eyes as they were wide open as if the mace did not affect him at all. Then he said calmly in a creepy voice, "I was just looking at her." We both screamed bloody murder and he let me go and we ran all the way to her car and got the heck out of Dodge. The weird thing is we didn't even go straight to the police that night because I wasn't sure if that was enough of an offense to do so, which I am in my 40s now and know that it is. I should have gone straight to the police then. I tried calling the non-emergency line the next day to report it as I was suffering from red and swollen eyes from the mace and I was being placed on hold and not being taken seriously, so I eventually let it go and moved on with my life. A week later I heard in the news that there was a man wanted by police that lingered around the American River trails who was abducting women and taking them into his van and assaulting them. I always wonder what would have happened if my friend wasn't there. Would I even be here? I have never been so thankful to be maced in the face. Ladies ... even men carry mace or some type of self-defense tool. It's an unpredictable, scary place out there sometimes. This happened almost 10 years ago when I was about 18. I wanted to go pick up some groceries at our local Walmart. It was around 11 in the afternoon at night and I just got off work. I usually have no problem going anywhere by myself, but on this specific night my inner self was telling me to invite my friend to tag along. I am roughly 5 feet tall, female, and 105 pounds, but I don't get spooked too easily and always carry pepper spray with me. Anyways, I call my friend to ask if she'll accompany me and I go and pick her up. We walk into the produce side of Walmart and almost right away I noticed this man staring at us very intently. He was around 5'5", kind of heavy, had a Hawaiian shirt on, and looked of Hawaiian decent. So we're over by the fresh produce and I am keeping my eye on him as he pretends to be looking at bread but clearly keeps putting things back. I turn my back for a second to grab something, then I hear a male's voice ask, "Hey, do you guys know of anywhere I can get food this late?" For more background information, I lived in a city of about 50,000 people. Right across from this Walmart was an Applebee's, a McDonald's a quarter mile up the road, and other various places to get food. Plus, we were in the middle of a Walmart, so I don't beat around the bush and flatly tell him about a couple restaurants around where we were. He then asks, "Well, what's fun to do around here?" It's late at night, so nothing really to do except maybe go to Applebee's or a local bar. I tell him Applebee's is open and we have bars downtown, but that's all I am aware of. He proceeds to ask what we're doing when we leave and I tell him we have to leave now. He apologizes and says he didn't mean to be creepy, so we walk away and are looking for the frozen aisle when I spot him on the opposite side walking by. I tell my friend I had a bad feeling about him since we walked in and wanted to test out if he was following us. We walk a few more aisles and sure enough he is on the other end nonchalantly walking by pretending not to see us. I backtrack a couple of aisles to get something and he walks up pretending to look at things. I finally ask if I can help him with something. I think I threw him off guard by being so direct because he stutters and asks what aisle the milk or something is in. I tell him and we leave to check out. Well, wouldn't you know, he's in the checkout right next to us with a pack of gum, no milk or whatever else he was looking at. He finishes first and watches us as he leaves the store. We thinking he's gone by now tells my friend let's just run to the car. So we run out to the car, looking around to make sure we don't see him. Now here's the super creepy part. As I am leaving the parking lot, we spot him sitting on the trunk of his car watching people leave Walmart. I drive by to get his license plate number. He sees us and rushes into his car. I speed off as quickly as possible so he doesn't see where I went. I then call the cops and tell them what happened and relayed the license plate to them. So creepy Hawaiian shirt guy who was supposedly looking for a place to eat while in the middle of Walmart. Please let's never meet again. This happened about a month ago. For a bit of background, me, my cousin, and my brother took classes over the summer at a local college. Me and my cousin took a biology class, while my brother took a precalculus class. My brother's class ends later than our class, giving us a 2-hour window where we'd sit around the college to wait for him. During the encounter, we were waiting for him at the cafeteria, passing the time. After a while, this woman in a wheelchair shows up in front of some vending machines a couple feet in front of us. I paid it no mind, but she sat in front of that vending machine for 10 minutes, 15 minutes and started to play loud music. It startled me and so I looked up at her. She then looked at us and asked, "Do any of you boys have 10 cents I could use for the vending machine?" I had 2 $5 bills in my pocket in case I needed some food, so I gave her a 5 and I got handed back my change. Then she asked for another favor. This time it was to bring her to a parking lot near the football stadium where her ride would be waiting. She said she had never been there and needed some guidance. I figured there was no harm in helping her so I took the handles, but she immediately stopped me and asked for my cousin instead. said. I was being pretty oblivious during this entire encounter, so I didn't even realize how strange that request was and didn't notice many of the strange things she did until later. And I also want to clarify that she was able to move on her own just fine, so the request for a push at all was strange too. And as my cousin was pushing her, she kept looking back at me and giving an uncanny smile, like it was meant to be a friendly smile, but it came off more like she had some sort of malicious intent. After we arrived, she looks at us and asks, "Could you two stay with me until my ride comes?" Still giving us the smile, but we reluctantly agreed. You know, once I had to go back and forth from here and the other parking lot. It was so annoying, she recalls as we wait. Me and my cousin shuffled at this because we found this extremely unsettling. This was because it meant she lied to us about not knowing where she was going. Even stranger, she tells me about how she loves to smash glass bottles to tame her anger ... like the glass bottles she had in her hands at that moment. I hadn't caught onto the strangeness yet, but my cousin was unnerved. He was trying to discreetly point out that no cameras were around me and that not many people were around, but I didn't catch any of it. At some points while we were waiting, this one car would keep circling the parking lot too. We asked if it was her ride, but she told us that her ride was a van. At that time, our ride came, so we apologized and left. We've told many other people about this story and they all agreed that she was acting pretty strange. Later I realized how it seemed like she was trying hard to be friendly, how anxious she seemed, and how many of the things she said didn't match up and seemed off. The main thing that fueled me seeing this as odd was the fact that according to my cousin and his sibling, there was an email sent out warning people about a potential human trafficking scheme caught on campus. I couldn't confirm the validity of it because me and my brother aren't actually enrolled into the school and therefore don't get messages about anything going on around campus, but nevertheless, it's caused me to relook what happened through that lens. Shortly after I turned 18, back in the early 2000s, I got a job at the local movie rental place to help pay for my college. I worked there for about 2 years and during that time had been promoted to hold keys to the store and open and close the registers. This also meant that I was occasionally working by myself for short periods of time. One such morning, I was going through the morning procedures and putting returned movies back on the shelves. I was accustomed to greeting every customer no matter what, not only as a friendly gesture but as a part of the loss prevention protocol. Anyway, this particular morning I was taking the movie cart around and reshelving the movies and I heard the door ding on the other side of the store, so I greet whoever it is with my voice raised high. "How are you today?" Normally they would give a reply back, but I didn't get one this time, so I'm looking between the shelves for the person that came in and I see a middle-aged, baldy man looking around. He seemed normal at first but didn't really say anything when I asked him the next 2 times if he needed help. He pretty much ignored me, so I went about my business while keeping my eye on him. He was starting to make me nervous because he wasn't really looking at anything, just kind of making it look like he was looking at what was in front of him when his attention was focused elsewhere, seemingly at the ceiling. So I decided to give it one more try to let him know that I'm wondering what he's doing. "Can I help you find anything?" I asked as I walked past him to put a movie away. At this point, he'd been in the store nearly 20 minutes. He responded in such a way that made it clear that there was something off in his mind. Facing me but with his eyes averted from my face, he says in a startlingly loud drawling voice, "Oh, you know, just browsing." So I politely said, "Okay, just let me know if I can help you with anything," and went about my duties. He left shortly after this, at which point I let out a sigh of relief. A few days went by and I was opening by myself again. I went to start shelving the movies when the door dinged, and I again turned to greet whoever it was when I saw the same guy beelining it straight at me. I kind of panicked a little but stood my ground, and when he got right up to me, seriously so close I leaned back away from him. He lifted an open can of nuts and offered cashew. "Oh no, thank you," I said. I asked if I could help him find anything and he didn't answer, and he went to the start of the wall where the movies that started with it were located, which was just a few feet to the left of where I was putting up the B or C movies. He was very obviously pretending to look at movie boxes by picking them up and flipping them over and then putting them back. He continued this and shuffled along behind me as I moved down the wall. After a few minutes of this, I got uncomfortable and took the cart to the front counter, at which point he left the store. A few customers came and went, and I went back to shelving the movies. When I was around the M area of the movie wall, cashew guy came back and continued his pretend perusal of the movie boxes, always just a few feet to left of me. So in the next area of the store, there were shelves that went a bit higher than the rest, and on the very top shelf, there were softcore movies. There was also a back room that contained the hard stuff, but I only went in that room one time right before I quit just to see what it was like. Anyway, I was shelving the movies with cashew guy near me, not saying anything to me until I get to softcore section section. He reached for one of the boxes at the top, which made me shudder, and says to me in his loud, strange voice, "I bet you have one of those big football player boyfriends." Thoroughly creeped out and disgusted, I go straight to the front counter and another male customer walks in. This guy finds what he's looking for and goes to the register. I whispered to this guy that there was a man bothering me and I asked if he would stay until the guy leaves. He shrugged and just kinda stood by the door awkwardly until cashier guy walked out. I thanked the guy and he left. I went back to the shelves and not 5 minutes later, cashier guy came back and again tried to engage me in an awkward conversation. I went to the front counter and called my mom. She and my sister were out getting lunch, so I told her what was going on and they brought me something to eat. As soon as I picked up the phone, he left the store. He didn't come back that day. Next door to the movie place was an electronics store that was run by a very nice and talkative man. I never spoke to his wife, but I knew English wasn't her first language. He would come over and use our shrink wrap machine and talk and make us laugh. One evening after my encounter with this strange man, the nice guy from the store came in more serious than normal and warned us about a man that had come in while his wife was working alone and he was out getting food. The man was walking around picking things up and putting them back down in such a way that made him uncomfortable. I knew who it was right away. After a while, the nice guy from the store's wife asked if he was going to purchase something and he picked up a random house phone and asked how much it was. She told him and he got upset at the price. He took it to the counter anyway, and when she rang him up, he tried to pay with a crumpled up check from his pocket. She refused to accept the check and he got angry, so she called her husband to come back and handle the situation. Her husband told the man that the check was suspicious and they normally wouldn't accept it as payment. He understood that there was something off with this guy and agreed to accept the check on a condition that the man give a phone number where he could be reached. He told him that if the check bounced, he was going to call him and the man would have to cover the cost of it all. The man agreed, but he knew it was a bad deal all the way around. He said that after the man left the store, he went and stood in the parking lot and just stared up at the sky for about 10 minutes. I figured by his description that it was the same man who had been bothering me. One day not long after the above, I go to the movie store to pick up my paycheck and the girl working tells me some man came in asking about me. She said he seemed off, and she said she knew he was talking about me when he referenced my curly hair. He gave me the creeps, but I personally never saw the guy again. I found out why when a few days later the guy who owned the other store came in saying that, unsurprisingly, the check the man had paid with bounced. He called the number the man gave him a few times and talked to the man on the phone. Each time getting nowhere in the conversation, he did a pretty good impersonation of the startlingly loud drawling voice. "Oh yeah, okay." Anyway, he called one more time and a woman answered. When he explained the situation, the woman said, "I'm his mother, he's not here anymore, I had him committed, and the hospital picked him up this morning." The town I lived in could not even be called that. It was a settlement of perhaps 24 acreages clustered together near a lake, and boasted just an elementary school with grades kindergarten through grade 5, and no stores. On this particular day, I was at that school playground alone, swinging and pondering life. None of my friends were around, but the solitude never bothered me. I was perfectly content, swinging and daydreaming as I often did. That is when I noticed the van behind me. It was your classic creepy van. Older, large and boxy, white generic van. And what struck me as odd was how slow the van was driving. It could not have been driving faster than 10 miles per hour. Still swinging, I craned my neck and watched this van slowly creep along and then out of my line of vision. I thought that was the end of it when, a few minutes later, along comes the van again, ever slow, and this time, driving on the road in front of the park the best way to vision where I was is that of a square. Road wraps completely around the playground, which is situated on a slight hill. I watched the van creep along, turn left and out of sight, and back behind me it came creeping along, ever slow and present. As I watched it disappear for the second time, I recalled an incident that took place just 2 months prior. In the nearby town where I was attending school, a few kids in the grade below mine had been approached by a man as they walked home from school, who offered them candy. He had allegedly been driving a white van. School officials had urged us to stay very vigilant. I began to run across the field, determined to beat the van to that road. Don't panic, I told myself. It's probably not the same guy. And that is when the idea hit me. Oh, the idiotic, dangerously foolish idea hit me. I was going to hide myself in a nearby bush, and as the van crept by, I would obtain its license plate and give it to the police. It would be to us, a 12-year-old self. What were you thinking? I was thinking, because I did just that. I hid in the bushes, and I waited and waited. I waited to no avail, and as I waited, the logical part of my brain kicked in. This was an extremely lonely, well-concealed spot of land. Maybe, just maybe, trying to obtain this license plate was not a smart idea. I suddenly wanted very much not to be in that isolated bush. Abandoning my attempts at being Nancy Drew, I began the journey home with a sense of urgency. As I walked along the road, a dirt pavement, I took in my surroundings and saw no van. Perhaps it had left the area. I thought hopefully. I turned right, away from the school and playground, and began to walk towards my house. Safety lay just beyond the hairpin turn of a road that I was jaunting along. A loud screeching of tires came into my ear canal. I turned slightly and saw it, the white van. Where it came from, I did not know. What I did know was that I was extremely isolated and that it was speeding towards me. That is when the lizard brain took over. I no longer thought. I read. I was no longer a whole being. My sole purpose was to run. I can still feel my sweaty feet sliding around in my sandals, still see my pink skirt frantically trying to keep up with still hear those squealing tires. I flung myself down the hill. At the foot of it lay my house, my lifeline. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the van for the last time. It was haphazardly turning left and away from me. The next thing I knew, I was standing at the family deep freeze, a red freezy in my hand. Vaguely, I heard a faint voice miles away. I was breathing heavily, hyperventilating really. What happened? What happened? My dad's face was white as a ghost. A hardened man, he looked truly afraid. I spat out the story and burst into tears. My dad hugged me. You're safe, he assured me. Then he left, determined to find this van. As he was gone, I run throughout the house, locking the doors when Dad returned. He told me he had seen no van. It had disappeared into the afternoon sun. Dad phoned the police anyway, and he stressed the similarities between what happened to me to the reports of what happened to my schoolmates. Unfortunately, the police never came to talk me. I don't think they really cared. I stayed in the house for the next few days, afraid to venture out. As the days wore on, I regained my confidence to return to the park, and life went on. I never did see that van again. I still shudder to think about what may have happened all those years ago if I had let that van catch up to me. The people in this story are me, a family of 4 consisting of a mother, father, toddler, and baby. And, of course, our guest of honor, the creep. For context, I am a 17-year-old female. I was born and raised in Canada with a pretty sheltered life as my mother is very overprotective. But up until this point, I have never dealt with harassment before. For the summer, I am visiting my godmother in Italy. This is my first time leaving Canada. Since she works during the weekdays, I travel about on my own around Italy. For this story, I took a ferry to Ischia, a small island in Napoli, to tour around. When I first arrived on the island, I made the plan to head to a small scenic park not too far from the port so I could plan my day. It was around 3 in the afternoon when I was at the park. Now the park itself made its way into a semi-forested area. The pathways were covered by trees and bushes alike, so it's easy to get lost in there, at least for me. It was also pretty desolate at the time and gone from the public eye. I was sitting on the bench next to a playground for children, decked out with swings and slides. There was a family a little away from me playing at the playground. The playground resides in a little circle-like clearing in the park. On opposite sides of the clearing are the pathways that take you around the park. The paths have trees making a tunnel-like path, so it can be hard to see down it unless you are directly in front of it. From where I was sitting on the bench, which was near the north pathway, I could directly see down the south pathway. Now I was sitting at this bench for a while, mind you, as Italy is pretty hot and I'm not used to the heat. My head was down looking at my phone, so I wasn't exactly paying attention to the outside world. But I would look up periodically to watch the family play. It was around now 4 in the afternoon, which was nearing when I had to leave to catch my ferry back. As I was about to pack up, I look up from my phone and see a guy standing in the path across from me, the south pathway. Now I wear glasses. My eyesight isn't that good, so I couldn't really make out what this guy was standing there for at first glance. I also didn't want it to be known that I had my eyes on him, so I would try to get a better look from my peripherals. After a minute of watching this guy and trying to figure out why he was staring at me, I come to a horrifying conclusion. To put it lightly, this guy was jacking off in public while watching me. It was light out and a literal family was not even 10 feet away from me. This was the first time I've ever experienced anything like this, so I was scared. Let me make myself clear, I look like a teenager. I have acne and a baby face, so it is very clear I am underage. As I was sitting there panicking about what to do, I see this guy move side to side on the path to get a better look at me. The creep looked unassuming, with some gray basketball shorts, a black graphic shirt, and a balding head. From what I could tell, he he was around his early 30s. I don't speak much Italian, and with how frazzled I was from this all, I could not utter a cohesive sentence. After sitting on the bench for another minute trying to calm down and think clearly, I pull out my translator app and type in a message to translate to Italian. Now to not alert this creep that I knew what he was doing, I stood up casually and began to make my way to the mother of the family who was with her young baby at the time. The father and the toddler I believe were gone playing off a little farther in the trees as I could not see them. While shaking with nerves, I approached the mother and hold up my phone with the message on it without a word. Now from where the mother was, you could not see down the path, so she was none the wiser about what was happening. Roughly, my translated message went along the line of, "Hello, sorry I do not speak much Italian, but I am in need of help. There is a creepy guy on the path over there watching me and I am scared." Now I know I probably should have made my situation more clear in the message, but I was freaking out and I didn't know how well my English would translate into Italian, so I kept it short. After the mother read the message, she got a concerned look on her face and asked me to show her where this guy was. Now we walked like 5 feet over to where the path begins to find the guy and he's gone. I assume he saw me walking towards the mother. Thankfully, I came to find out the mother speaks a little English, so I was able to communicate roughly what the creep was doing. Since she was with a baby, I didn't want her to go after the creep, but she was mad enough to attempt. Eventually, she told me her husband would be back soon and he spoke more fluently. Once he came back, I re-explained what happened and asked if I could follow them out of the park to a public area so I would not be left alone and vulnerable. While they were packing up their belongings, I called my godmother and gave her a brief rundown of the situation and that I'll be making my way back to the ferry. Now I would love to say this is where my tale ends without any more troubles, but sadly that was not how it went. After me and the family left the playground area, we made our way to the opposite path from where the creep was to where I assumed was the exit to the park into the main road. While walking, the mother tried to comfort me, assuring the guy wouldn't follow me as he left as soon as he got a clue that I caught on. I thought differently as I could see this guy very clearly from where I was sitting and was not subtle about his staring. After walking a bit more throughout the path to the exit, I spot a familiar looking man walking back to the playground. Once I made eye contact with him, I immediately knew it was the creep from before, walking casually like nothing was wrong. Once he spotted me walking with the family, he quickly made a turn onto a path that diverged from the main one. This creep was circling back to find me, assuming that I stayed at the playground or was walking alone to the exit. I leaned over to the mother and quickly told her that it was the same guy. Unfortunately, the path that the guy took to avoid us was the same one we needed to take to get to the exit. This dumb creep cornered himself without any way to leave except to pass by us. The father at that point had the baby in his arms and the toddler following closely behind him. The mother in a rage followed shortly after, the creep cussing him out in a mix of English, Italian, and Spanish. This creep walked sheepishly off with his head tucked, pretending he could not hear the lady yelling at him. Finally, after the angry mother stopped following the man, we made it to the exit of the park. I thanked them profusely and bid my farewells and made my way down to the port. That family saved me from a dangerous situation and I could not be more thankful for their comfort and protection. I often think about what could have happened had I left the park on my own, knowing this guy would have circled back for me. So for my first harassment experience, I give the rating -1 out of 5 stars, would not recommend. So to the creepy guy in the park, let's not meet ever again. At the time of this happening, a 23-year-old female, was 19 and homeless in a big city. I just recently moved to that city and was on my way back to the shelter from the public library. I was taking a shortcut through an alley wide enough for a car to go through, and I noticed an old beat-up looking car come into the alley and driving slowly behind me. I figured they probably just didn't feel like they had enough room to pass me, so I picked up the pace and crossed the street. They drove to the same side of the street that I was on and kept pace with me. There was just one guy in the vehicle, looked to be in his mid-20s and Hispanic. He rolled down his window and said, "Hey, are you okay? How old are you?" I looked like I was about 14, and I'm pretty short, so I got that question a lot. I just responded, "I'm fine, and I'm not a minor if that's what you're asking." He asked me if I needed a ride, and I politely declined. Then he starts telling me he's just really concerned and wanted to talk, really insistently and smiling through almost this entire interaction. I asked him why we couldn't just talk on the street where we were, and he dodges the question and again asks me if I'm sure that I don't want to ride. My gut was telling me he had bad intentions, and if I were as young as I looked, I might have fallen for it. Instead, I looked around me to make sure I wasn't going to get ambushed and walked up to his passenger window. I told him in the most threatening voice I could muster, "I know you don't really want to talk. I'm sure you have worse things in mind, and I've memorized your license plates and I'm going straight to the police station. I better not ever see you again." I never saw him again. Unfortunately though, I forgot to write down his plates and the shelter curfew was going into effect soon and I didn't have time to file a report at the station. It didn't occur to me me to call the non-emergency number. I also purchased as large of a knife as I legally could for self-defense. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. When I first moved to the city for my job, I was excited. The tall buildings, the constant hum of activity, and the promise of new experiences were alluring. I found a cozy apartment on the 15th floor of a high-rise, offering a panoramic view of the cityscape. Little did I know, this view would become the backdrop of my nightmare. It started innocuously enough. I began receiving small gifts at my doorstep, a bouquet of flowers, a box of chocolates, and sometimes handwritten notes. The notes were always unsigned, filled with compliments about my appearance or what I had worn that day. Initially, I thought it might be a secret admirer or a neighbor trying to be friendly, but as days turned into weeks, the gifts became more personal. A scarf in my favorite color, a book by an author I loved, and even a CD of a band I had casually mentioned liking to a colleague. Concerned, I mentioned this to my friend, Lisa, who lived a few blocks away. She suggested it might be someone from work or a friend playing a prolonged prank. To ease my mind, she offered to stay over for a few days. One evening, as we were watching a movie, Lisa pointed to a building opposite mine. "Do you know that from here, if someone had a good enough telescope, they could see right into your apartment?" I looked out, realizing that my large windows, which I loved for the sunlight they let in, also made my life visible to anyone interested in watching. A shiver ran down my spine. The next day, I invested in curtains. But the gifts didn't stop. They became more frequent, and the notes more intimate, detailing things I had done in the privacy of my home. "I loved how you danced in your living room last night," one read. Another said, "The spaghetti you cooked looked delicious." I reported this to the police, but without any tangible evidence or threat, they couldn't do much. They advised me to keep a record of everything I received and to install security cameras. The cameras were my next step. I installed them inside and outside my apartment. For a week, nothing unusual happened. But then, one morning, I found a note on my doorstep. "Cameras won't help you see me, but I can always see you." Terrified, I reviewed the footage, and there it was. In the middle of the night, a figure in a hood and mask, leaving the note at my door. The cameras inside my apartment showed nothing. This person had never entered, yet they knew everything I did. Lisa suggested I stay with her for a while. Gratefully, I accepted. A few days turned into weeks, and during this time, no gifts or notes appeared at my apartment. I started to relax, thinking maybe my unseen observer had lost interest. One evening, as Lisa and I returned to her place after dinner, we found her door slightly ajar. Cautiously, we entered. In the middle of her living room was a pile of photographs. They were all of me, taken from a distance, capturing my daily routines. But the most chilling were the ones taken inside Lisa's apartment, showing me sleeping, cooking, or chatting with her. The realization hit hard. This person hadn't lost interest. They had merely shifted their location. They had been watching me from somewhere close, even at Lisa's place. The police were involved again, and this time they took it more seriously. They started by investigating the building I had initially spotted from my apartment. On the topmost floor, in a rented storage room, they found what could only be described as a shrine dedicated to me. Photographs, personal items I had discarded, and a logbook detailing my daily activities. The tenant renting the space was a man named Eric, a freelance photographer. He had become infatuated with me from afar and had started his silent observation. The police arrested him, and he confessed to stalking me for months. He claimed he loved me and believed we were meant to be together. The trial was swift, and Eric was sentenced to several years in prison and mandatory therapy. I moved out of the city, seeking solace in a quieter, more private place. After the trial, I found it hard to return to any semblance of normalcy. The city, once a symbol of opportunity and excitement, now felt like a vast expanse of potential threats. Every stranger's glance felt like a piercing gaze, every unexpected noise a potential danger. I decided to move to a smaller town, hoping the change of scenery would help me heal. The town I chose was the polar opposite of the city, nestled in the mountains. It was a place where everyone greeted each other by name and where community events were the highlight of the week. My new home was a cottage on the outskirts, surrounded by trees and overlooking a serene lake. The first few months were peaceful. The natural beauty of the place and the kindness of the locals were therapeutic. I took up gardening, spent hours reading by the lake, and even adopted a dog, Max, who quickly became my loyal companion. However, the scars of my past experience ran deep. I invested in a state-of-the-art security system for my cottage and often found myself double-checking locks and windows. Nighttime was especially challenging. Every rustle outside outside, every creak of the wooden floorboards would send my heart racing. One evening, as I was settling into bed, Max began to growl, his gaze fixed on the window. I tried to calm him down, thinking he might have seen a squirrel or some other animal, but his growling intensified, turning into barks. Concerned, I approached the window and peered out. To my horror, I saw a silhouette of a man standing at the edge of the woods, his figure illuminated by the moonlight. He was just standing there, staring at my house. Panic surged through me, memories of Eric and his relentless stalking flooding back. I immediately called the local sheriff's department. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars arrived, their sirens piercing the otherwise silent night. The officers conducted a thorough search of the area but found no one. They took my statement and promised to increase patrols around my property. The next morning, I found a single photograph on my doorstep. It was a picture of me taken from a distance while I was gardening. On the back, written in a familiar handwriting, were the words, "New place, same us." I handed the photograph to the police. They confirmed my worst fears. Eric had been released on parole for good behavior and had somehow managed to track me down. The police immediately issued a warrant for his arrest and provided me with round-the-clock protection. Days turned into weeks, and there was no sign of Eric, but the fear was ever present, the feeling of being watched never leaving me. One evening, as the storm raged outside, there was a knock on my door. Max immediately went into guard mode, his growls echoing through the house. I approached the door cautiously, peeping through the peephole. It was one of the officers assigned to patrol my house. I opened the door, relief washing over me, but as I greeted him, I noticed his uniform was drenched, not from the rain, but in blood. Before I could react, he lunged at me, a deranged look in his eyes. We struggled, Max barking and snapping at him. In the chaos, I managed to hit him with a vase, knocking him out. The police arrived shortly after, having received a distress signal from the officer's car. It turned out that Eric had ambushed the officer, taken his uniform, and tried to get to me. He was arrested and sent back to prison, this time with no chance of parole. The ordeal was a stark reminder that the past can come back to haunt you, no matter how far you run. But it also taught me the importance of resilience and the will to fight back. With the support of the community and therapy, I began to rebuild my life, determined not to let fear define me. Today, I'm an advocate for stalking victims, using my experience to raise awareness and help others. The journey has been long and challenging, but I've learned that with determination and the right support, one can overcome even the darkest of shadows. I've always been a creature of habit. My routines were predictable, from my morning coffee run to my evening jogs in the local park. It was this predictability, however, that nearly became my undoing. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the park was bathed in the golden hues of the setting sun. The familiar trail, with its canopy of trees and the gentle sound of the nearby stream, was comforting. As I jogged, my earbuds delivered my favorite podcast, creating a bubble of contentment. About 15 minutes into my run, I noticed a man sitting on one of the park benches. He was dressed inconspicuously in jeans and a hoodie, but his intense gaze was fixed on me. I felt a pang of unease but brushed it off, attributing it to an overactive imagination. As I continued my run, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. Every rustle of the leaves, every distant footstep seemed amplified. I decided to cut my run short and head home. As I neared the park's exit, a black sedan pulled up alongside me. The rear window rolled down, and the same man from the bench leaned out. "Hey, I think you dropped this," he said, holding up a pendant that looked eerily similar to the one I always wore. Confused, I slowed down, instinctively reaching for my necklace. To my horror, it was missing. "Oh, thank you," I replied cautiously, reaching out to take it. In a split second, the man lunged at me, trying to pull me into the car. Panic surged through me, and I fought back with all my might, screaming and thrashing. My earbuds were yanked out, and the pendant fell to the ground. Suddenly, a pair of headlights illuminated the scene. Another car had turned into the park's entrance. The man, startled, released his grip on me. Seizing the opportunity, I pushed him away and ran towards the approaching car, waving frantically. The car screeched to a halt, and 2 people jumped out. The man in the sedan, seeing he was outnumbered, quickly drove off. The couple from the car rushed to my aid, their faces etched with concern. Shaken, I recounted the events to them. They immediately called the police, who arrived within minutes. I provided a description of the man and the sedan, and they began their search. The following days were a blur of police statements, sleepless nights, and overwhelming anxiety. The thought of how close I had come to being abducted haunted me. My routines, once a source of comfort, now felt like potential pitfalls. A week later, the police made a breakthrough. The black sedan was found abandoned in a nearby town. Inside, they discovered ropes, duct tape, and a collection of women's personal items, including my pendant. The car was registered to a man with a history of stalking and assault. He had been released from prison a few months prior and had seemingly returned to his old habits. With the evidence at hand, the police launched a manhunt. It wasn't long before they apprehended him, hiding out in a motel. The trial was swift, and he was sentenced to life in in prison without the possibility of parole. The ordeal left a lasting impact on me. I became more vigilant, always aware of my surroundings, and never taking my safety for granted. I also became an advocate for personal safety, conducting workshops and seminars to educate others about the importance of being alert and prepared. The experience also taught me the value of community. The couple who had come to my aid, Jake and Mia, became close friends. Together, we founded a non-profit organization dedicated to helping survivors of abduction and assault, providing them with the resources and support they need to rebuild their lives. The aftermath of the incident was a transformative period in my life. The city, which had once been a playground of familiar routines, now felt like a labyrinth of shadows. Every corner held potential danger, every stranger a potential threat. But as the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the raw edge of fear began to dull, replaced by a newfound determination. Jake, Mia, and I poured our energy into the nonprofit. We named it Safe Steps, symbolizing the journey towards safety and recovery. Our first initiative was to create a community watch program. Volunteers were trained to patrol neighborhoods, especially during the early morning and late evening hours, ensuring that those out for a jog or returning from work felt a little safer. We also collaborated with local schools and colleges, conducting workshops on personal safety. Students were taught basic self-defense techniques and the importance of being aware of their surroundings. These workshops became immensely popular, and soon we were receiving requests from institutions across the state. But perhaps the most impactful initiative was our support group for survivors. Every week, we would gather in a community center, forming a circle of trust and understanding. Here, survivors could share their stories, their fears, and their hopes. Listening to their experiences, I realized I wasn't alone in my trauma. We were a tapestry of resilience, each thread telling a story of survival and hope. One evening, after a particularly emotional support group session, a young woman approached me. Her name was Clara, and she had been attending our sessions for a few weeks. With tears in her eyes, she handed me a small package. Inside was appended, identical to the one I had lost. "I wanted you to have this," she whispered. "Your story, your strength, gave me hope. This is a small token of my gratitude." I was moved beyond words. It was moments like these that reaffirmed my belief in the path I had chosen. From a victim, I had become a beacon of hope for others, turning my traumatic experience into a force for positive change. Years passed, and Safe Steps grew from a local initiative to a national movement. We received endorsements from celebrities, partnered with major corporations for funding, and even collaborated with the government on policy changes related to personal safety and victim support. As I sit in my office today, surrounded by awards and accolades, I often find myself reflecting on that fateful evening in the park. It was a moment that could have broken me, but instead, it became the catalyst for a journey of empowerment and advocacy. Life has a way of throwing curveballs, testing our mettle and resolve. But it's in these moments of adversity that we discover our true strength, our purpose, and with the right support and determination, we can turn our darkest hours into our most defining moments. The quaint town of Elmridge was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names, children played freely in the streets, and doors were often left unlocked. It was this sense of security and community that drew me to Elmridge after years of living in the bustling city. I found a charming two-story house on Willow Street, complete with a white picket fence and a sprawling backyard. The previous owners had maintained a beautiful garden, and the large oak tree in the corner provided a canopy of shade. It was idyllic, a place I could finally call home. The first few weeks were filled with the excitement of settling in. I got to know my neighbors, the elderly Mrs. Thompson to my left, who had lived in Elbridge her entire life, and the young Martins family to my right, with their two boisterous kids. One evening, as I was arranging my bedroom, I noticed something odd. The window facing the backyard had a small, almost imperceptible scratch on the glass, forming a circle about the size of a quarter. I dismissed it as wear and tear, making a mental note to get it fixed. A few nights later, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a faint noise coming from the backyard. It sounded like the soft crunch of leaves. I sat up, straining my ears, but the sound had stopped. Thinking it might be an animal, I went back to sleep. The next morning, as I was watering the plants, I found footprints near my bedroom window. They were fresh, indicating that someone had been there the previous night. A chill ran down my spine. I immediately reported it to the local police. Officer Daniels, a stout man with a kind face, arrived shortly after. He examined the footprints in the scratched window. "It looks like someone's been peeping," he said gravely. "We've had a few similar reports in the area recently. We're doing our best to catch this individual." He advised me to be vigilant, to keep my windows and doors locked, and to report any suspicious activity. The news was unsettling. The sanctuary I had found in Elbridge felt tainted. That evening, I installed motion sensor lights around the house and set up a security camera facing the backyard. I also informed my neighbors about the incident, urging them to be cautious. Days turned into weeks, and there were no further incidents. The sense of unease gradually faded, replaced by the routines of daily life. but the illusion of safety was shattered one evening. I was in the living room, engrossed in a book, when the motion sensor light suddenly turned on and I froze, my heart racing. Grabbing my phone, I accessed the live feed from the security camera. To my horror, I saw a man standing near my bedroom window, his face obscured by a hood. He was holding something small and shiny, which he was using to scratch the window, creating the same circular mark I had noticed earlier. I immediately called the police, keeping an eye on the intruder through the camera feed. He seemed unaware of the lights or the camera, completely engrossed in his active voyeurism. Within minutes, I heard sirens in the distance. The man, hearing them too, began to panic. He looked around frantically, finally noticing the camera. Our eyes met through the lens, and for a brief moment, I saw a look of sheer terror on his face. He bolted just as Officer Daniels and his team arrived. They gave chase, and after a brief pursuit, the man was apprehended. He was identified as Tom Mitchell, a resident of Elmridge with a history of voyeuristic behavior. The small shiny object he used to scratch windows was a ring, a twisted trophy of his escapades. The news of his arrest sent shockwaves through the community. People were horrified that one of their own could commit such acts. The scratched windows, his signature, were found in several homes, revealing the extent of his voyeurism. In the aftermath, the community came together, holding meetings to discuss safety measures and offering support to those affected. I, too, became an active participant, sharing my experience and advocating for increased vigilance. The weeks following Tom Mitchell's arrest were a mix of relief and introspection for the Elmridge community. The town meetings became more frequent, evolving from discussions about safety to broader topics like mental health and community support. It was clear that while Tom's actions were inexcusable, there was a collective desire to understand the underlying causes and prevent such incidents in the future. Mrs. Thompson, who had lived in Elmridge her entire life, shared stories of a younger Tom, a boy who had faced challenges from a young age. Abandoned by his parents, he had grown up in foster care, often feeling isolated and misunderstood. While this didn't excuse his actions, it painted a picture of a troubled individual who had slipped through the cracks. Inspired by these discussions, the Martins family took the initiative to start a community outreach program. Their aim was to identify and support individuals in Elmridge who were struggling, whether it be with mental health issues, financial difficulties, or feelings of isolation. I joined the program, seeing it as an opportunity to turn a negative experience into positive action. Our first project was to set up a community center, a space where residents could come together for various activities, workshops, and support groups. We organized fundraisers, and the response was overwhelming. People from all walks of life contributed, from teenagers hosting bake sales to local businesses donating supplies. The Elmridge Community Center, as it came to be known, quickly became the heart of the town. We offered after-school programs for kids, counseling services, job training workshops, and even art and music classes. It was a place of healing, learning, and connection. One of the most impactful programs was the Mentorship Initiative. Adults in the community volunteered to mentor young individuals, providing guidance, support, and a listening ear. The idea was to ensure that no one felt alone or unsupported, as Tom had. As months turned into years, the ripple effects of the community center became evident. Elmridge saw a decrease in crime rates, an increase in school performance, and most importantly, a stronger sense of community. Neighbors looked out for each other, and the bonds formed in the center spilled out into the streets, parks, and homes. On a personal level, the experience was transformative. The trauma of that night with the peeping Tom had left scars, but working with the community, channeling my energy into positive change, was therapeutic. I formed deep friendships, especially with Mia from the Martins family. Together, we spearheaded many of the center's initiatives, drawing strength from each other. One evening, as we were wrapping up a workshop at the center, Mia handed me a letter. It was from Tom Mitchell. With trepidation, I opened it. The letter was a heartfelt apology, expressing remorse for his actions and gratitude for the changes the community had implemented. He wrote of his time in therapy, the revelations he had about his behavior, and his hope for a second chance. While the letter didn't erase the past, it was a testament to the power of community intervention and support. Elmridge had turned a dark chapter into a story of hope, resilience, and collective growth. Today, as I walk the streets of Elmridge, I'm filled with pride. The town, with its vibrant community center, active outreach programs, and tight-knit residents, stands as a beacon of what's possible when people come together in the face of adversity. It's a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's always a glimmer of hope waiting to be ignited. It was a typical Thursday evening. I had just returned from a long day at work, and the only thing on my mind was to kick back, watch some TV, and maybe indulge in a glass of wine. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building, and while it wasn't the most modern or luxurious, it was home. The creaky wooden floors and the old-fashioned radiators added a certain charm that I had grown fond of. I settled into my couch, remote in hand, when I heard a faint noise coming from the hallway. It sounded like footsteps, but I brushed it off as one of my neighbors. The walls were thin, and I had grown accustomed accustomed to hearing the occasional noise from the hallway or the apartment next door. A few minutes passed, and I heard the noise again. This time, it was closer, almost right outside my door. I muted the TV and listened intently. The footsteps were soft, deliberate, and eerily quiet. It was as if someone was trying their best not to make a sound. My heart began to race. I lived alone, and the thought of an intruder was terrifying. I tiptoed to the door and peered through the peephole. The hallway was dimly lit, but I could make out the silhouette of a man standing just a few feet away from my door. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie and a mask. He seemed to be listening, waiting for something. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't notice me. Suddenly, he began to fiddle with the doorknob. Panic surged through me. I hadn't locked the door when I came in. I quickly turned the lock, but it was too late. The door creaked open slightly, and the man's eyes met mine. For a split second, we both froze. Then, without a word, he pushed the door with force. I stumbled back, trying to find something to defend myself with. The intruder was now inside my apartment, his eyes scanning the room. I grabbed a vase from the coffee table and hurled it at him. It missed, shattering against the wall, but it bought me a few precious seconds to run to my bedroom and lock the door. I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold onto it. The operator picked up, and I whispered my address and the situation. She assured me that the police were on their way and told me to stay on the line. The intruder was now banging on my bedroom door, shouting threats. I could hear the wood splintering, and I knew it wouldn't hold for long. I quickly opened my window, which led to the fire escape. Without a second thought, I climbed out, praying he wouldn't follow. I made my way down the metal stairs as quickly as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the ground, I ran to the street, looking for help. A few neighbors had come out, drawn by the commotion. They took me in, offering comfort and support. The police arrived within minutes. They searched the building and found the intruder hiding in the basement. It turned out he had been responsible for a string of burglaries in the area. He had been watching me for days, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. I was shaken, but grateful to be alive. The experience was a stark reminder of the importance of always being vigilant and taking precautions to ensure one's safety. I now double-check my locks every night and have installed a security system. I also joined a neighborhood watch group, determined to prevent others from going through what I did. The weeks that followed were a blur of police statements, court appearances, and sleepless nights. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the window sent my heart racing. I had nightmares of the intruder, his masked face looming over me, his cold eyes filled with malice. My friends and family were incredibly supportive. They offered to stay with me, to keep me company during the long nights, but I declined. I needed to face my fears head on, to reclaim my space and my sense of security. One evening, as I was returning from work, I noticed a note slipped under my door. It was from Mrs. Henderson, the elderly lady who lived in the apartment below mine. She had written, "Dear, I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. If you ever need someone to talk to, or just a cup of tea, my door is always open." Touched by her kindness, I decided to take her up on her offer. Over cups of chamomile tea, Mrs. Henderson shared her own story. Years ago, she had been the victim of a home invasion. She spoke of the trauma, the fear, and the long journey to healing. But she also spoke of resilience, of the strength she discovered within herself, and of the community that rallied around her. Our conversations became a regular occurrence. We'd sit in her cozy living room, surrounded by photos of her grandchildren and mementos from her travels, and talk for hours. She became a source of comfort and wisdom, a beacon of hope in my darkest moments. One day, she handed me a small pendant. It was a delicate silver locket with an intricate floral design. "This was my mother's," she said. "She gave it to me after the incident as a reminder that I was never alone. I want you to have it." I was moved to tears. The locket became a symbol of my journey, a reminder of the strength I had found within myself and the support I had received from those around me. As the months went by, I began to heal. The nightmares became less frequent, the fear less paralyzing. I started attending therapy, where I learned coping mechanisms and strategies to deal with my trauma. I also became more involved in the community, volunteering at a local shelter and joining self-defense classes. The intruder's trial came to an end, and he was sentenced to several years in prison. While it brought some closure, I knew that true healing would come from within. I had to let go of the past to move forward and rebuild my life. Today, I'm a stronger, more resilient person. I've learned the importance of community, of looking out for one another, and of never taking our safety for granted. I've also learned that even in our darkest moments, there is always a glimmer of hope, a hand reaching out to help us through. And every day, as I wear the silver locket around my neck, I'm reminded of the journey I've been on and the incredible people who have stood by my side. I've always been an avid hiker. The feeling of being surrounded by nature, the chirping of birds, and the rustling of leaves underfoot is therapeutic for me. I've hiked countless trails, from the well-trodden paths of national parks to the lesser-known local trails. But there's one hike I'll never forget, and it's not because of the beauty of the trail. It was a warm summer evening, and I decided to take a hike in a forested area about an hour's drive from my home. I had been to this forest a few times before, but I always stuck to the main trail. This time, I wanted to explore a bit, so I decided to venture off the beaten path. About an hour into my hike, I stumbled upon a clearing. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over everything. I decided to take a break and enjoy the view. As I was sitting there, I heard faint voices in the distance. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow the sound. The voices grew louder as I approached, and I soon realized they were chanting. I treaded carefully, making sure not to make any noise. As I got closer, I saw a group of about 20 people, all dressed in long, dark robes, standing in a circle around a large bonfire. They were chanting in a language I couldn't recognize. I hid behind a tree, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The group seemed to be performing some sort of ritual. In the center of the circle, there was a large wooden statue, crudely carved to resemble a humanoid figure. The statue was surrounded by various objects, including animal skulls, candles, and what looked like bowls of liquid. Suddenly, one of the robed figures stepped forward, holding a live chicken by its legs. The chanting grew louder and more intense. The figure raised the chicken above his head and then swiftly brought it down, cutting its throat with a sharp knife. The blood was collected in one of the bowls. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I had seen enough. I slowly began to retreat, making sure not to alert the group to my presence. But as I was backing away, I stepped on a twig, which snapped loudly under my weight. The chanting stopped abruptly. All eyes turned in my direction. My heart raced as I realized I had been spotted. Without thinking, I turned and ran as fast as I could, not looking back. The forest was dark now, and I could hear the group chasing after me. Their chants had turned into angry shouts. I ran blindly, tripping over roots and branches, but the adrenaline kept me going. After what felt like hours, I finally reached the main trail. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I started the car and sped away, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. When I finally reached home, I locked all the doors and windows. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I didn't sleep that night or the next. The following day, I reported the incident to the local police. They searched the forest but found no trace of the group or their ritual site. They told me it was probably just a group of kids playing a prank, but I knew what I saw was real. A few weeks after the incident, I tried to put the whole thing behind me. I focused on work, spent time with friends, and even took up a new hobby, pottery. Anything to distract myself from the haunting memories of that evening in the forest. But the universe had other plans. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I returned home to find a small package on my doorstep. There was no return address, just my name written in a hurried scrawl. Curiosity piqued, I opened it. Inside was a small, hand-carved wooden figurine. It bore an uncanny resemblance to the larger statue I had seen in the forest clearing. My heart raced as I turned the figurine over in my hands. Tied around its neck was a note that read, "We know where you live." Panic sudden, I immediately called the police, who took the package for examination. They advised me to stay somewhere else for a few days, just to be safe. I decided to stay with my sister, who lived in a neighboring town. The next few days were a blur. The police couldn't find any fingerprints on the package or the figurine. They patrolled my neighborhood but found no signs of suspicious activity. They suggested it might be a prank, but I wasn't convinced. One evening, as I was leaving my sister's house to grab some takeout, I noticed a car parked across the street. It was an old, beat-up sedan with tinted windows. I didn't think much of it at first, but when I returned, the car was still there. And the next morning, and the next evening, it was always there, watching. I reported it to the police, who sent a patrol car to check it out. But by the time they arrived, the sedan was gone. This cat and mouse game continued for days. Every time I saw the car and called the police, it would disappear before they arrived. Feeling trapped and paranoid, I decided to confront the situation head on. One night, when I saw the sedan parked across the street, I approached it. As I got closer, the car's engine roared to life, and it sped away, but not before I caught a glimpse of the driver, a man in a dark robe. I was now certain that the group from the forest was stalking me. But why? What did they want? Desperate for answers, I decided to hire a private investigator. After explaining everything to him, he agreed to look into it. He started by digging into local legends and folklore. What he found was chilling. The forest, it turned out, had a dark history. There were tales of a secret cult that had operated in the area for centuries. They were rumored to perform rituals and sacrifices in the forest, especially during the summer solstice. The wooden statue I had seen was a representation of their deity, a forest spirit that they believed granted them power and immortality. The Pai believed that my accidental discovery of their ritual had put me in grave danger. They saw me as a threat and would would stop at nothing to ensure my silence. With this information, the police launched a full-scale investigation. They combed the forest, and after days of searching, they stumbled upon the ritual site. The clearing was empty, but evidence of recent activity was evident. The breakthrough came when a local farmer reported seeing a group of people in dark robes entering an old, abandoned farmhouse on his property. The police raided the farmhouse and found the cult members, including the man I had seen driving the sedan. The group was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including stalking and attempted kidnapping. It turned out they had been planning to make me their next sacrifice. I was finally free from their clutches, but the trauma of the experience will stay with me forever. I moved to a different city, changed my name, and started a new life. The forest, once a place of solace for me, now represents a dark chapter in my life that I hope to never revisit. But one thing is for sure, I'll never venture off the beaten path again. When I first moved into my new apartment, everything seemed perfect. It was a quaint 2-bedroom unit in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The rent was affordable, and the location was close to my workplace. I was thrilled to have found such a gem. The first time I met Mr. Thompson, my next door neighbor, was on a sunny Saturday morning. I was unloading boxes from my car when he approached me with a wide grin. He was an older man, probably in his late 60s, with thinning gray hair and deep-set blue eyes that seemed to always be observing. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Harold Thompson, but you could call me Harry." I shook his hand, introducing myself. He offered to help with the boxes, but I politely declined. There was something about his intense gaze that made me slightly uncomfortable. Over the next few weeks, I settled into my new home. I'd occasionally run into Mr. Thompson in the hallway or the parking lot. He was always friendly, often striking up conversations about the weather or local news. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me a bit too closely. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, I heard a knock on my door. I opened it to find Mr. Thompson holding a plate of freshly baked cookies. "Just a little welcome gift," he said with a smile. I thanked him, albeit hesitantly, and closed the door. The cookies looked delicious, but I couldn't bring myself to eat them. Instead, I threw them away, feeling a pang of guilt for being so suspicious. A few days later, I came home to find a note slipped under my door. It was from Mr. Thompson, inviting me over for dinner. I pondered the invitation, torn between wanting to be polite and my growing unease. In the end, I decided to decline, citing a prior engagement. That's when things started to get strange. I began to notice Mr. Thompson more frequently. He'd be outside watering his plants when I left for work and would still be there when I returned. He'd often be in the hallway, seemingly waiting for me, and on more than one occasion, I caught him peering into my windows. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was being paranoid, but the incidents kept piling up. I'd find small gifts outside my door, flowers, chocolates, even a stuffed animal. Each time, there'd be a note from Mr. Thompson. One evening, as I was watching TV, I heard a noise coming from my balcony. I cautiously approached the sliding door and peered outside. To my horror, I saw Mr. Thompson standing there, trying to pick the lock. I immediately called the police. They arrived within minutes, arresting Mr. Thompson. As they led him away in handcuffs, he kept shouting, "I just wanted to be friends." The next day, I spoke to the building's property manager. She looked visibly shaken as she told me about Mr. Thompson's history. He had previously been institutionalized for stalking and had a restraining order against him from a former neighbor. She apologized profusely for not informing me earlier. I was in shock. I had unknowingly been living next to a psychopath. I immediately began looking for a new place to live, eager to put this nightmare behind me. A few weeks later, as I was packing up my belongings, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Mr. Thompson, written from jail. In it, he professed his love for me and vowed to wait for me, no matter how long it took. I was terrified. I moved out the next day, leaving no forwarding address. I also changed my phone number and deleted all my social media accounts. Months turned into years, and the memory of Mr. Thompson began to fade. I had built a new life for myself in a bustling city, far away from the quiet suburban neighborhood where I had once lived. My new apartment was on the 15th floor of a high-rise building, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. The added security measures, like the 24-hour concierge and CCTV cameras, gave me a sense of safety I hadn't felt in a long time. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I decided to unwind in a local wine bar. As I sipped on my glass of Chardonnay, I noticed a man sitting at the other end of the bar, staring intently at me. He was older, with a familiar set of deep-set blue eyes. My heart raced as I realized it was Mr. Thompson. Panicking, I quickly paid my bill and left the bar. I hailed a cab and instructed the driver to take a roundabout route to my apartment, hoping to lose any potential tail. Once home, I double-checked all the locks and drew the curtains. The next morning, I contacted the police and informed them of the sighting. They assured me they would look into it, but without any concrete evidence, there wasn't much they could do. Days turned into weeks, and there were no no further sightings of Mr. Thompson. I began to wonder if I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe the trauma of the past had made me see things that weren't there. But one evening, as I was returning home from work, I found a familiar-looking note slipped under my apartment door. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. They read, "Distance can't keep us apart. I've missed you." I was paralyzed with fear. How had he found me? And how had he managed to get past the building's security? I immediately contacted the building management and the police. They reviewed the CCTV footage and, to my horror, found multiple instances of Mr. Thompson loitering in the building's lobby. He had somehow managed to bypass security by posing as a maintenance worker. The police launched a manhunt, but Mr. Thompson was nowhere to be found. They stationed an officer outside my apartment and advised me to stay vigilant. Despite the added security, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak, every shadow sent me into a panic. Sleep became a distant memory. One night, as I was lying in bed, I heard a soft tapping on my window. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I mustered the courage to peek through the curtains and came face to face with Mr. Thompson, who was dangling from a rope outside my 15th floor apartment. I screamed, alerting the police officers stationed outside my door. Within seconds, they had apprehended Mr. Thompson. It turned out he had been living in the building's basement, plotting his next move. Mr. Thompson was charged with stalking, breaking and entering, and attempted kidnapping. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The ordeal left me traumatized. I sought therapy and slowly began to rebuild my life. I moved to a different country, started a new job, and even adopted a dog for companionship and protection. Today, I'm in a much better place, both mentally and emotionally, but the scars of the past will always remain. I've learned the hard way that monsters aren't just in stories, they can be right next door. The city had always been my sanctuary. The hustle and bustle, the lights, the sounds, it all felt alive and comforting. But that perception changed one fateful night. I had been out with friends at a local pub. We laughed, shared stories, and lost track of time. Before I knew it, it was past midnight. My friends, who lived in the opposite direction, offered to share a cab, but I declined. My apartment was only a 20-minute walk away, and I had made the journey countless times. Besides, the night was clear, and the streets were illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights. The first 10 minutes of my walk were uneventful. The city's sounds began to fade, replaced by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional hoot of an owl. I was lost in thought, replaying the evening's events in my mind, when I noticed a figure about half a block behind me. At first, I thought nothing of it. It was a city after all, and people were always out and about. But as I continued walking, I realized the figure was matching my pace. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, the distance between us remained the same. A knot of unease formed in my stomach. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I decided to test my theory. I quickened my pace, and sure enough, the figure did the same. I then took a sudden turn down a side street, and after a few moments, the figure appeared, still tailing me. Panic sudden, I pulled out my phone, ready to dial the police, but to my horror, the battery was dead. I cursed myself for not charging it earlier. I knew I had to lose this person, so I decided to take a detour through a nearby park. It was a risk, given the park's reputation for being a hotspot for unsavory activities at night. But I was desperate. As I entered the park, the only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves underfoot. The path was dimly lit, with shadows dancing eerily in the moonlight. I moved as quickly and quietly as I could, hoping to put some distance between me and my pursuer. But as I neared the park's exit, I heard footsteps closing in. They were fast and deliberate. I broke into a run, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps grew louder, echoing in the stillness of the night. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my arm, pulling me to a stop. I screamed, ready to fight for my life, but the grip on my arm tightened. "Hey, wait," the voice called out. I turned to face my pursuer, and to my surprise, it was a woman, probably in her early 30s. She looked as scared as I felt. "I'm so sorry," she panted, catching her breath. "I didn't mean to scare you. I saw that man following you, and I wanted to make sure you were okay." Confused, I asked, "What man?" She pointed to the park's entrance, where a tall, shadowy figure stood, watching us. The woman explained that she had been leaving a late-night shift at a nearby convenience store when she noticed the man trailing me. Concerned for my safety, she decided to follow and intervene if necessary. We quickly exited the park, sticking together as we made our way to the main road. The man didn't follow, but we weren't taking any chances. The woman, whose name was Lisa, offered to walk me home, and I gratefully accepted. As we approached my apartment, I thanked Lisa for her kindness and bravery. We exchanged numbers, promising to stay in touch. She insisted on waiting until I was safely inside before leaving. That night, I lay in bed, shaken by the evening's events. The city that had once felt so familiar now seemed fraught with danger, but in the midst of that fear, I found solace in the kindness of a stranger. Lisa and I became fast friends, bonding over our shared experience. We often joked that it was the universe's way of bringing us together, but in all seriousness, I'll forever be grateful to her. She reminded me that even in our darkest moments, there's always a glimmer of hope. In the days that followed, I took extra precautions. I invested in a portable phone charger, started attending self-defense classes, and made it a point to never walk home alone late at night. The incident had been a wake-up call, and I was determined to be better prepared. Lisa and I grew closer, often meeting up for coffee or a movie. We became each other's confidantes, sharing stories of our past, our dreams for the future, and everything in between. It was refreshing to have someone who understood the trauma I had experienced and who had been there to help me through it. One evening, as we were leaving a local cafe, Lisa's face turned pale. She grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "It's him," she whispered, nodding subtly towards a man sitting a few tables away. He was engrossed in a newspaper, but there was no mistaking him. It was the man from that night. We quickly left the cafe, trying to remain calm. Once we were a safe distance away, Lisa revealed a chilling detail. She had seen the man several times since our encounter in the park, always lurking in the shadows, watching from a distance. She had even received anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night, with nothing but heavy breathing on the other end. We decided to go to the police. They took our statements and promised to investigate. A few days later, they called us in for an update. The man, whose name was Robert, had a history of stalking and had served time in prison for similar offenses. He had been released on parole a few months before our encounter. The police issued a restraining order against Robert and warned him to stay away from both of us. But the damage had been done. The feeling of being constantly watched, of never truly being safe, weighed heavily on us. Lisa and I leaned on each other for support. We installed security cameras in our homes, joined a support group for stalking victims, and even started a neighborhood watch program. We were determined to reclaim our sense of security and help others do the same. As the months went by, there were no further incidents. Robert seemed to have gotten the message and disappeared from our lives. While the experience had changed us, we became more vigilant, more aware of our surroundings, and more appreciative of the simple joys of life. One evening, as we sat on my balcony watching the sunset, Lisa turned to me with tears in her eyes. "You know," she said, "as terrifying as that night was, I'm grateful for it. It brought us together and showed us how strong we truly are." I nodded in agreement, squeezing her hand. We've been through hell and back, but we came out stronger on the other side, and for that, I'm forever grateful. We sat in silence, watching as the sky turned from orange to pink to purple. The city lights twinkled below, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. It was a cold winter night, and I had just finished a late shift at the office. Exhausted and eager to get home, I decided to hail a taxi instead of waiting for the bus. Within minutes, a yellow cab pulled up, and I climbed into the back seat. The driver, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a scruffy beard, gave me a curt nod as I told him my address. He didn't say much, which was fine by me. I was too tired for small talk. As we drove, I noticed that he kept glancing at me through the rearview mirror. At first, I brushed it off, thinking he was just checking on his passenger, but as the journey continued, his stares became more prolonged and intense. Feeling uneasy, I decided to make small talk to break the tension. "Busy night?" I asked. He grunted in response, his eyes never leaving the road. "Not really. You're my last fare for the night." I nodded, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, he was just a taxi driver doing his job. But as we continued driving, I realized we were heading in the wrong direction. My apartment was in the north end of the city, but we were heading south. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think you're going the wrong way." He didn't respond. Instead, he locked the car doors and increased his speed. Panic set in. I fumbled for my phone, but before I could dial 911, he reached back and snatched it from my hand. "Who are you? What do you want?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He chuckled, a cold, humorless sound. "Just taking a little detour." I racked my brain, trying to think of a way out. The windows were locked, and the doors wouldn't budge. I was trapped. As we drove further away from the city, the surroundings became more desolate. We were now on a deserted country road, surrounded by thick woods on either side. Suddenly, the car came to a screeching halt. The driver turned to face me, his eyes cold and emotionless. "Get out," he ordered. I hesitated, fear gripping me. "Please, just let me go. I won't tell anyone." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife, its blade gleaming in the dim light. I said, "Get out." With no other option, I complied. The cold air hit me as I stepped out of the car, my breath visible in the freezing night. The driver got out as well, the knife still in his hand. He approached me slowly, a sinister smile playing on his lips. "You know," he said, "I've been driving this cab for years, and every once in a while, I like to have a little fun." I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. "Please, just let me go," I begged. He laughed, the sound echoing through the silent woods. "Not tonight." Suddenly, headlights appeared in the distance. Another car was approaching. The driver hesitated, glancing between me and the oncoming vehicle. Seizing the opportunity, I made a run for it. I sprinted into the woods, the driver's shouts echoing behind me. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I just ran, my only thought to get as far away as possible. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon a house. I banged on the door, pleading for help. An elderly couple answered, their faces filled with concern. I quickly explained what had happened, and they immediately called the police. The officers arrived within minutes, taking my statement and launching a search for the taxi driver, but he was nowhere to be found. The only trace of him was his abandoned cab, parked on the side of the road. The police later informed me that the taxi was stolen, and the driver had a long history of criminal activity, including assault and robbery. They believed he had targeted me for a potential robbery, but his intentions had changed when he realized I was alone. I was shaken by the ordeal but grateful to be alive. The elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. O'Brien, kindly offered to let me stay with them for the night, and I gratefully accepted. The next day, I returned to the city, determined to put the traumatic experience behind me. But the memory of that night haunted me. I became wary of taxis, opting to walk or use public transport instead. Months went by, and the police were unable to locate the driver. I began to lose hope that he would ever be brought to justice. But then, one day, I received a call from Detective Martinez, the lead investigator on my case. "We got him," he said, his voice filled with relief. "He was picked up in a neighboring state for a different crime, but we were able to link him to your case through fingerprints found in the stolen taxi." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Justice had finally been served. The aftermath of that night changed my life in more ways than I could have imagined. The trauma lingered, manifesting in nightmares and a constant state of alertness. I sought therapy, which helped me process the events and rebuild my sense of security. One day, while attending a group therapy session for trauma survivors, I met Anna. She had been through a similar ordeal, having narrowly escaped an attempted kidnapping. We bonded over our shared experiences and soon became close friends. Anna introduced me to a non-profit organization she had started aimed at helping women learn self-defense and personal safety techniques. She believed that empowerment was the key to overcoming trauma. Inspired by her passion and determination, I joined her mission. Together, we organized workshops and seminars teaching women how to protect themselves and be more aware of their surroundings. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of women attended our sessions, eager to learn and share their own stories. As the months went by, our organization grew. We received funding from local businesses and even partnered with the police department to offer advanced self-defense training. The community rallied around us, and we became a beacon of hope for many. One evening, after a particularly successful workshop, Anna and I sat down for a cup of coffee. We reflected on our journey and how far we had come. "You know," Anna said, "sometimes I think that everything happens for a reason. As terrible as our experiences were, they led us to this moment, to this mission." I nodded in agreement. It's amazing how something so traumatic can lead to something so positive. We've turned our pain into power. Anna smiled, and we're just getting started. Over the next few years, our organization expanded beyond our city. We opened branches in other states, reaching thousands of women and making a real difference in their lives. But despite our success, I never forgot that fateful night. It served as a constant reminder of why our work was so important. One day, I received a letter in the mail. It was from the taxi driver, written from prison. In it, he expressed remorse for his actions and claimed to have found redemption behind bars. He thanked me for the work I was doing and hoped that it would prevent others from going down the same dark path he had. I read the letter with mixed emotions. While I appreciated his attempt at making amends, I couldn't forget the terror he had inflicted upon me. But I also realized that people could change, and perhaps he truly had turned his life around. I decided to respond, thanking him for his letter and expressing hope that he would use his time in prison to reflect on his actions and make amends. As the years went by, I continued my work with the organization, always striving to make a difference. And while the memories of that night still haunted me, I took solace in the knowledge that I was helping others and turning a negative experience into a positive force for change. The city's subway system had always been a marvel to me. The intertwining tunnels, the rhythmic clatter of the trains, and the diverse sea of commuters, it was like a pulsating vein of the metropolis. But one late night, my perception of the subway shifted from wonder to wariness. I had been working late at the office, trying to meet a deadline. By the time I packed up, it was well past midnight. The streets were deserted, with only the occasional car passing by. I decided to take the subway home, as I had done countless times before. The station was eerily quiet. The fluorescent lights flickered over overhead, casting long shadows on the platform. I could hear the distant hum of a train approaching. I waited alone, lost in thought, until the train pulled up with a screech. The carriage was almost empty, save for a few late-night travelers. I took a seat near the door, plugging in my headphones and settling into my music. A few stops later, a man boarded the train. He was tall and lanky, with unkempt hair and a scruffy beard. His clothes were tattered, and he carried a large duffel bag. He took the seat across from me, and I couldn't help but notice that he was staring intently in my direction. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was being paranoid, but as the journey continued, his gaze never wavered. Every time I looked up, our eyes would meet, and he'd offer a chilling, toothless grin. Feeling uneasy, I decided to move to another carriage at the next stop. As the doors opened, I quickly made my exit, slipping into the adjacent car. I took a seat near the back, hoping the man wouldn't follow, but to my horror, as the train pulled away from the station, I saw him enter the carriage, his eyes scanning the rows of seats until they landed on me. He began to make his way towards me, his steps slow and deliberate. Panic set in. I considered pulling the emergency brake, but I was worried about the consequences. Instead, I decided to get off at the next stop and wait for another train. As the train approached the station, I stood up, ready to make a quick exit, but the man was faster. He blocked the aisle, his duffel bag acting as a barrier. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, his voice raspy and cold. I tried to keep my composure. "Please, just let me go," I pleaded. He chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Not so fast." Suddenly, the train jolted, throwing us off balance. I seized the opportunity, pushing past the man and sprinting towards the door. I could hear him shouting behind me, but I didn't stop. I ran out of the station and into the night, not looking back until I was several blocks away. Out of breath and shaken, I hailed a cab and made my way home. I locked all the doors and windows, double-checking every room to ensure I was alone. The next day, I reported the incident to the police. They took my statement and promised to investigate. A few days later, they called me in for an update. The man, whose name was Victor, was a known criminal with a history of assault and robbery. He had recently been released from prison and was believed to be living in the subway tunnels. The duffel bag he carried contained stolen goods from a recent burglary. The police arrested Victor and recovered the stolen items. He was charged with multiple offenses and sent back to prison. I was relieved to know he was off the streets, but the trauma of that night stayed with me. I avoided the subway for months, opting to walk or take cabs instead. Months turned into years, and while the memory of that night never truly faded, I learned to cope and move forward. The city, with its endless possibilities, was still my home, and I wasn't going to let one traumatic event define my experience. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I decided to face my fears head on. I descended into the subway station, the familiar hum of the trains and the chatter of commuters filling the air. My heart raced as I boarded the train, memories of that night flooding back, but I was determined to reclaim this space. The journey was uneventful, and as I exited the station, I felt a sense of accomplishment. I had faced my fears and emerged stronger. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Victor, written from prison. In it, he expressed remorse for his actions and claimed to have turned his life around. He wrote about attending therapy and anger management classes and finding solace in religion. He apologized for the pain he had caused and hoped that I could find it in my heart to forgive him. I read the letter with mixed emotions. While I appreciated his attempt at making amends, I couldn't forget the terror he had inflicted upon me, but I also believed in the power of redemption and that people could change. After much contemplation, I decided to visit Victor in prison. I needed closure, and this seemed like the best way to achieve it. The visit was tense, with both of us struggling to find the right words, but as we spoke, I saw glimpses of the changed man he claimed to be. Victor spoke about his troubled past, the choices that led him down a dark path, and his desire to make amends. He expressed gratitude for the second chance he had been given and hoped to use his time in prison to better himself. As I left the prison, I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. I had faced my attacker, heard his side of the story, and found a sense of closure. Over the next few years, Victor and I corresponded regularly. He kept me updated on his progress, and I offered words of encouragement. When he was released on parole, I was one of the first people he reached out to. We met for coffee, and I saw firsthand the changes he had made. He had found a job, reconnected with his family, and was determined to stay on the right path. Today, Victor and I share an unlikely friendship. We both have scars from our past, but we've chosen to move forward and focus on the future. We often speak at schools and community centers, sharing our story and the lessons we've learned. Our hope is to inspire others to believe in the power of redemption and the possibility of change. Life is unpredictable, and we never know where it will take us. But one thing is certain, with resilience, support, and determination, we can overcome even the darkest moments and find our way back to the light. This city had always been my home, a bustling metropolis filled with life and energy, but sometimes the noise and chaos became too much, and I sought solace in the local park. It was a sprawling green space, dotted with ancient trees and serene ponds. By day, it was filled with families and joggers, but by night, it transformed into a quiet oasis. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I decided to take a walk in the park. The sun had set, and the park was bathed in the soft glow of the streetlights. The air was cool and crisp, and the only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the chirping of crickets. I followed the winding path, losing myself in the beauty of nature. The trees cast long shadows on the ground, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. I felt at peace, the stresses of the day melting away. As I walked deeper into the park, I noticed a figure up ahead. It was a man, standing by the edge of a pond. He was tall and lean, dressed in dark clothing. His face was obscured by the shadows, but I could see that he was staring intently at the water. Feeling uneasy, I decided to give him a wide berth. I veered off the path, making my way through the trees. But as I did, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through me. I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, but the feeling of dread only grew stronger. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. They were soft and deliberate, echoing in the stillness of the night. I dared not look back, fearing what I might see. Instead, I broke into a run, my only thought to get out of the park as quickly as possible. The footsteps grew louder, matching my pace. I could hear the man's ragged breathing, a chilly reminder that he was closing in on me. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning and my legs aching. Up ahead, I saw a bridge that led to the park's exit. I sprinted towards it, praying that I would make it in time. But as I reached the bridge, I felt a cold hand grab my wrist, pulling me back. I screamed, struggling to break free. The man's grip was like iron, unyielding and relentless. He pulled me closer, his face inches from mine. His eyes were cold and emotionless, devoid of any humanity. "Where do you think you're going?" he whispered, his voice dripping with malice. I tried to respond, but fear had rendered me speechless. I could only stare into his eyes, praying for a miracle. Suddenly, a bright light shone in the distance. The man turned to look, momentarily distracted. I seized the opportunity, using all my strength to break free. I ran towards the light, not looking back until I was safely out of the park. The light came from a police car, patrolling the area. The officers had heard my screams and had come to investigate. They quickly took my statement and launched a search for the man, but he had vanished without a trace. The police informed me that there had been several reports of a man stalking women in the park. They believed he was a serial predator preying on lone women. They advised me to avoid the park at night and to always be aware of my surroundings. I was shaken by the ordeal, and it took me a long time to come to terms with what had happened. I sought therapy, which helped me process the trauma and rebuild my sense of security. I also joined a self-defense class, determined to never feel helpless again. Months after the incident, the park became a focal point for community action. News of my encounter spread, and soon, other women came forward with similar stories of being followed or approached by a mysterious man during their evening walks. The community rallied together, demanding increased security measures and better lighting in the park. Local businesses and residents raised funds to install surveillance cameras at key points throughout the park. The city council also increased police patrols during the evening hours. A neighborhood watch group was formed, with volunteers patrolling the park in shifts, ensuring that no one was ever truly alone. One evening, as I was attending a community meeting about the park's safety initiatives, a woman named Maya approached me. She was in her early 30s, with a determined look in her eyes. She revealed that she too had had a close encounter with the mysterious man, but had managed to fend him off using self-defense techniques she had learned. Inspired by our shared experiences, Maya and I decided to start a self-defense workshop for women in the community. We partnered with local martial arts instructors and organized weekly sessions in the park. The response was overwhelming. Women of all ages attended, eager to learn how to protect themselves and reclaim their sense of security. As the weeks went by, the park began to transform. The once eerie silence of the night was replaced by the sounds of laughter and camaraderie. Women jogged, practiced yoga, and even organized nighttime picnics, refusing to let fear dictate their lives. The police continued their investigation, and with the help of the newly installed cameras, they were able to identify the mysterious man. He was arrested and charged with multiple counts of stalking and attempted assault. It turned out he had a history of violent behavior and had been released from prison just months before our encounters. The news of his arrest brought a collective sigh of relief to the community. The park, once a place of fear, had become a symbol of resilience and unity. Maya and I continued our self-defense workshops, expanding them to other parts of the city. We also started a non-profit organization dedicated to empowering women and promoting safety in public spaces. Today, the park is a testament to the power of community action. Families picnic under the trees, children play on the swings, and couples stroll hand in hand, enjoying the beauty of nature. The memories of that fateful night still linger, but but they are overshadowed by the positive change that emerged from it. As for me, I've learned the importance of trusting my instincts and being prepared. I still visit the park, but now I do so with confidence, knowing that I have the skills and the support of my community to keep me safe. The highway stretched endlessly before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the vast expanse of the countryside. It was late, and the only illumination came from the dim glow of my car's headlights and the occasional passing vehicle. The radio played softly in the background, a soothing melody that contrasted with the monotonous drone of the engine. I was returning from a business trip, eager to get home and crawl into bed. The journey had been long, and fatigue was beginning to set in. My eyelids grew heavy, and I struggled to maintain focus. Suddenly, in my rearview mirror, I noticed a set of flashing blue and red lights. My heart sank. I hadn't been speeding, or at least I didn't think I had. I glanced at the speedometer, confirming that I was within the limit. Still, I knew better than to argue with law enforcement. I pulled over to the side of the road, the gravel crunching beneath my tires. The police car, a standard black and white cruiser, parked behind me. I rolled down my window and waited, my hands resting on the steering wheel. A few moments later, a tall figure approached. The man was dressed in a police uniform, complete with a badge and a hat that cast a shadow over his face. He shone a flashlight into my car, the bright beam momentarily blinding me. "Evening," he said, his voice deep and authoritative. "License and registration, please." I fumbled in my glove compartment, retrieving the documents and handing them over. The officer examined them closely, his flashlight illuminating the details. "You were driving a bit erratically back there," he commented, his tone accusatory. "Have you had anything to drink tonight?" I shook my head. "No, officer, just tired from a long drive." He seemed to ponder this for a moment, then said, "Step out of the vehicle, please." Confused, I complied. The night air was cool, and I shivered slightly as I stood by the side of the road. The officer circled my car, his flashlight scanning the interior. "Everything okay, officer?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond. Instead, he motioned for me to follow him to the back of his cruiser. I hesitated, a sense of unease settling in. Something felt off. As I approached the police car, I noticed something odd. There was no license plate, and the cruiser lacked the usual markings of a police vehicle. The windows were tinted, preventing me from seeing inside. The officer opened the back door, revealing a dark interior. "Get in," he ordered. Alarm bells rang in my head. This wasn't standard procedure. Why would he want me to get into the back of his car? "I'd rather not," I replied, trying to sound confident. "Is there a problem?" The officer's demeanor changed instantly. His friendly facade dropped, replaced by a menacing glare. "Get in the car, now," he growled. Fear gripped me. I realized that this man wasn't a real cop. I was in grave danger. Thinking quickly, I reached into my pocket and pressed the panic button on my car keys. The car's alarm blared, its lights flashing wildly. The fake officer was momentarily startled, giving me the split second I needed. I bolted, running as fast as my legs could carry me. I could hear the imposter shouting behind me, his footsteps echoing on the asphalt, but I didn't look back. I ran until I reached a nearby farmhouse, pounding on the door until the startled occupants answered. They quickly let me in, and I explained the situation. They called the real police, who arrived within minutes. The fake cop was nowhere to be found, having fled the scene. The police launched an investigation, and it was discovered that the imposter had been involved in several other incidents, posing as a cop to rob and assault unsuspecting motorists. The cruiser he had been driving was stolen, and the uniform was a convincing replica. In the weeks that followed, my story became a cautionary tale that spread throughout the community. Local news outlets picked up on it, and I was interviewed multiple times, recounting the harrowing experience. While reliving the ordeal was emotionally taxing, I felt it was essential to raise awareness about the dangers of fake officers. The police department, in response to the incident and the growing public concern, initiated a campaign to educate the public on how to identify genuine officers and the correct protocol during traffic stops. They emphasized the importance of looking for authentic badges, proper vehicle markings, and always asking for an officer's identification if something feels off. Community meetings were organized where officers demonstrated the differences between real and fake uniforms, badges, and equipment. They also provided tips on what to do if one suspects they're being pulled over by an imposter, advising to drive to a well-lit, populated area or even the nearest police station, and to call 911 to verify the officer's identity. As time went on, the trauma of that night began to fade, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose. I became an advocate for personal safety, joining community watch groups and even collaborating with the police department on various initiatives. One evening, as I was leaving a community meeting, a woman approached me. She introduced herself as Lisa and thanked me for sharing my story. She revealed that she too had been pulled over by the fake cop but had remembered my advice. She asked for for his badge number and called 911, which had caused him to flee. Hearing Lisa's story, I was filled with a mixture of relief and pride. My ordeal had led to positive change, and I was determined to continue my advocacy work. Today, I travel across the country, sharing my story and educating others about the importance of personal safety. While the memory of that night still haunts me, I take solace in the knowledge that my experience has made a difference. The world can be a dangerous place, but with awareness, education, and community support, we can protect ourselves and our loved ones from harm. The open road has always been a source of solace for me. The hum of the engine, the rhythmic beat of tires against asphalt, and the ever-changing scenery provided a therapeutic backdrop for my thoughts. That night, as I drove through the windy roads of rural Montana, the world seemed to melt away, leaving just me, my old Chevy, and the vast expanse of the starlit sky. It was around midnight when I first saw him, a lone figure, standing by the side of the road, his thumb outstretched in the universal sign of a hitchhiker. He was tall, with shaggy dark hair and a beard, wearing a tattered jacket and carrying a worn-out backpack. Now, I've always considered myself a good judge of character, and I've picked up my fair share of hitchhikers over the years. Most were just folks down on their luck, looking for a ride to the next town. But something about this man gave me pause. Maybe it was the way he stood, slightly hunched, as if carrying an invisible weight. Or perhaps it was the intense, almost desperate look in his eyes as he stared at my approaching car. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and pulled over. The man approached, his footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. Heading to Whitefish, he asked, his voice rough from the cold. I nodded. Hop in, I replied, unlocking the passenger door. He climbed in, settling into the seat with a sigh of relief. Thanks, he said, extending a gloved hand. Name's Jake. We exchanged pleasantries as I resumed driving. Jake explained that he'd been on the road for days, making his way across the country. He'd run into some bad luck in the last town and was eager to move on. As the miles rolled by, I tried to engage Jake in conversation, hoping to learn more about my mysterious passenger, but he was evasive, giving vague answers and often staring out the window, lost in thought. An uneasy silence settled between us, broken only by the occasional howl of a distant coyote. The road grew darker and more isolated, with dense forests on either side. Suddenly, Jake spoke up. Take the next left, he instructed, pointing to a narrow dirt road that branched off the main highway. I hesitated. That's not the way to Whitefish, I replied, my grip on the steering wheel tightening. Jake's demeanor changed instantly. His friendly facade dropped, replaced by a cold, menacing glare. Just do it, he growled, his voice dripping with malice. Fear gripped me. I realized that I was in grave danger, but I also knew that I couldn't show it. I had to think fast. Alright, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but I need to refuel first. There's a gas station a few miles ahead. We can take the detour after that. Jake seemed to ponder this for a moment, then nodded. Fine, he replied, but no tricks. I drove on, my mind racy. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. The gas station was my best chance of escape, but I had to be careful. One wrong move could be fatal. As we approached the gas station, I noticed a police cruiser parked by the pumps. Relief washed over me. This was my chance. I pulled in, parking next to the cruiser. Jake watched me closely, his eyes never leaving mine. Stay here, I instructed, grabbing my wallet. I'll be right back. I entered the store, my heart pounding in my chest. The officer was at the counter, chatting with the cashier. I approached them, trying to appear calm. Excuse me, officer, I began, my voice shaking. I need your help. I quickly explained the situation, glancing out the window to make sure Jake hadn't noticed. The officer's face hardened, and he reached for his radio, calling for backup. They formulated a plan. The officer would approach the car, posing as a friend I'd run into. This would give me the opportunity to get away from Jake and ensure my safety. The plane went off without a hitch. The officer engaged Jake in conversation, allowing me to slip away. Within minutes, backup arrived, and Jake was taken into custody. It was later revealed that Jake was a wanted fugitive, responsible for a string of robberies and assaults across the country. The police believed he was heading to Whitefish to lay low and evade capture. I was shaken by the ordeal but grateful to be alive. The experience served as a stark reminder of the dangers of picking up strangers, no matter how harmless they may seem. Today, I'm more cautious than ever. I still enjoy the open road, but I no longer pick up hitchhikers. The memory of that night will forever be etched in my mind, a chilly reminder of the thin line between trust and danger. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.